Right, well, here we are on the twitch.tv/pgdad channel. Hi, Steven. This dude is Steven
Hello.
Stutz. And hopefully, you just please do give us feedback to let us know whether or not things are going appropriately in the stream.
Alright, well, I'm in the stream now.
Oh, good.
No one's here yet. It looks like, two people are here. Never mind. Including myself, I suppose, so.
Yeah, I'm here. Commander Root and Hamza's here.
Oh, cool.
So, are you Commander Root?
Me?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not Commander Root. No. I should be PYTHXG.
Well, that means you're going to eventually show up, I think.
Yep. Now it says 3 watching.
Oh, wonderful. So, we are here on Twitch instead of YouTube because, I don't know. I'm assuming that it has something to do with me not being able to keep my mouth shut.
No.
But this is Twitch IRL. We're doing real life things now, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we can't. There's no way we can possibly get kicked out of here.
Hopefully not. Yeah.
And we have some.
I don't think so.
And we have some stuff to go over for today. A few completely non-controversial articles, you know.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, I'm at the end of this article.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
Oh, which article are you talking about? Are you talking the campus speech codes calling Einstein
Yep.
a racist? Or
Yeah. The first one.
Okay. I figured that calling him a racist would be also relevant to
Yeah.
our previous conversation.
We've just been going off on Einstein these days.
Well, yeah.
Oh. But apparently that's the news these days is how bad a person Einstein was. Like, okay.
Okay. So here we are, thinking at the margin. I can't even recall what page we were on for the libertarianism thing. But anyhow, I will go, and without much further ado, go to our Duo stream overlay and I need to go and change the screen capture for that one too before we do anything. Nothing like leaving things to the very last minute, or rather, nothing like.
Hamza said you were censored by the powers that be, and then he said Einstein was evil.
Oh yes, of course Einstein was evil. We all know that. That's.
Yeah.
You know, that's the most basic things. Yeah, Einstein's terrible.
He definitely wasn't known for his kindness towards people, says Hamza.
What the crap? It's not letting me go. Oh. Apparently everything made it so I can't screen capture Firefox or anything of that nature, so...
Well, when I look in the, on the stream, the cropping and everything is right.
Yeah. It should be. I try not to put anything onto the stream that isn't right in the first place.
Well, that's a good...
It's like, I just don't want to screw it up.
That's a good mantra.
Don't want to screw it up. We can make that a little bigger, though. So the theory, the idea of this article is that all campus speech codes are incompatible with the First Amendment and should be abolished. And I will say all state university or state college speech codes. If you're a private university, you can say whatever you want on your property and tell people to say whatever you want on your property. But if it is state university property, well, the state can't or shouldn't be able to do that. So I think, you know, like University of California, Berkeley, for instance. The Ohio State University. No. Those that.
Yes.
Basically, if a university gets federal funding, then the answer should be no. If a university doesn't get federal funding, well then, my place, my rules. Of course, then you wind up having free market forces that if people want, a place where they can speak freely, and some universities offering free speech and another one isn't, well, guess where they're going to be going? So now there are university bias response teams. I mean, this reads like a joke Cold War era newspaper.
Bias response team.
Bias response team. Call in the bias response team. I mean,
I'm picturing like some overweight Power Rangers. I don't know.
Go Power Ranger bias response.
Go bias response team.
Oh no.
And they're like, yeah. Oh my god.
All right. So,
yeah.
How's the resolution of the stream for everyone?
It looks pretty good for me, actually. If I'm looking at it.
Well, yeah. He was. Einstein was a misanthrope. So what? Thought police. Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
All right. So,
Okay.
Going right on with the article, because why not? The U.S. Department of Justice joined a First Amendment lawsuit against the University of Michigan that claims U of M's speech codes covering harassment, bullying, and bias were unconstitutionally vague. In response, the University of Michigan quickly stopped fighting the lawsuit and revised the language it uses to guide bias response team investigations. The revisions may have temporarily ameliorated Michigan's bad press, but it did not resolve the underlying problem. Bias response teams and the speech codes they enforce use the power of the state to suppress unapproved speech and exert control over students. Such state action repressing free speech is corrosive to our democratic republic. Michigan's revised policy still allows them to punish unapproved speech. According to the university's website, the revised definition of bullying is any written, verbal, or physical act or any electronic communication directed toward a person that's intended to cause or that a reasonable person would know is likely to cause and that actually causes physical harm or substantial emotional distress, and thereby adversely affects the ability of another person to participate in or benefit from the university's educational programs or activities. Bullying does not include constitutionally protected activity or conduct that serves a legitimate purpose. So, but now they go and they say substantial emotional distress. Oh boy, that's not at all ambiguous.
Yeah, no.
I'm emotionally distressed.
Substantially, though.
I'm substantially emotionally distressed. They won't let me onto the Miss America pageant.
They're bullying me.
They're bullying me. They won't let me on the Miss America pageant. Can you believe that?
Wait, I need to reread their definition of bullying really quickly. It's just any speech that serves that causes. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Any written, verbal, or physical act or any electronic communication directed toward a person that's intended to cause, or that a reasonable person would know is likely to cause, and that actually causes physical harm or substantial emotional distress.
Towards a person. I think that's like if someone tweets out the example they use is someone tweeting about like abortion's murder, right? That's not directed at anyone. That's a tweet.
But even if it is directed at somebody, like going and saying that's bullying, like bullying.
True.
Bullying is beating somebody's face in. Bullying is, really simple, like non-facetious, go kill yourself kind of things. Although I would technically, I've been told to kill myself multiple times, and I didn't. So, even so, I would stand behind somebody's right to say that.
Right.
If someone is in the process of coordinating a crime, an actual crime, like something that actually causes real harm to somebody, then yeah, I would say, just consider that speech as part of the criminal activity. But speech, by definition, I mean, at least in principle, you should allow people to say that. I mean, if someone's fifis are going to get hurt, then there's this whole idea of, well, every party there needs to, I don't know, I don't too often go out of my way to go to places where my feelings are going to get hurt.
Right.
But even so, I mean, I know that going into a public place, I mean, some guy was acting like a complete and total jerk to my wife today. Unfortunately, he was going on a bicycle in the opposite direction to where we were going, so I wasn't able to you know, go and put a stop to the situation, or at least say, hey, dude, think before you speak, think before you act. Like, the thing that this dude, and he was like maybe in his 70s, it was far worse. It was far worse than an awful lot of the crap that people get their knickers in a knot over now at the university. And it was just like a normal part of everyday jerkish speech.
Right.
And I mean, he had a right to say it, but then I would have also,
exactly,
had my kids not been there and so on, I would have had a right to appropriately respond too.
Of course.
Assuming that we actually do care about the right to free speech.
Yes. Exactly. Well, yeah, on my campus, we actually have this thing called Speaker Circle.
Speaker Circle jerk?
No, Speaker Circle.
Oh.
No jerk. That'd be really interesting if we had a designated
jerker
place for that. But anyway, essentially anyone can say anything they want in this circle, and it's really fun. It's pretty funny.
Let the circle.
It's like one of the few places, apparently in my state, where free speech is fully fully allowed. So you get all types of shit happening there. And yeah, people, I mean, they can say anything they want pretty much. I mean, within reason, like obviously not like government threats and stuff like that. But yeah, people just go off and say whatever they want, and they won't get reprimanded for it. Now, a lot of times they get a crowd that's not so happy with it. That's like, you know, spewing vitriol back at them. But I don't know. It's funny to watch sometimes. And it's completely, free speech is completely allowed. But apparently it's one of the few places in Missouri you can do that.
One of the few places in Missouri that free speech is.
Yeah.
That's it's pretty bad if you know, you say this is an unalienable right.
Exactly.
An inalienable right. You have the right to free speech in this little box right here. Go anywhere else.
Yeah, it is. It is like a little circle, or like, you know, like maybe I don't know how many square feet or whatever, but it's not big.
Oh boy.
Pretty.
Probably it's a circle.
Let's see. I'm reading about it in Mizzou's our magazine.
Well, while you're doing that, I'll continue reading this.
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
This is a bureaucratic Gordian knot. So speech is protected unless it isn't. Clearly, physical acts that physically harm another should be punished. Such occurrences are matters for Michigan's campus police, not a bias response team. However, it appears raising one's middle finger, a physical act directed toward another person, would also be a violation, because a reasonable person knows it's intended to be emotionally distressing. I've not encountered any instances where flipping someone off or being flipped off is an act of kindness, yet is it bullying? Maybe. The revised policy remains unclear. Also, consider an electronic communication scenario where pro-life activist tweets abortion is murder, and another student who has an abortion sees and feels substantial emotional distress. The emotionally distressed student then files a complaint with administrators, leading to a bias response team investigation. What is the standard for adjudication? One reading of UN policies is that the tweet was constitutionally protected and served a legitimate purpose. Nothing to see here. Another reading supports action against the speaker because a reasonable person knows the message was likely to cause emotional harm. It's an impossible standard. Okay, so this is the part where the left goes and tears itself to bits. Because pretty soon you're going to wind up having anyone saying, well, anyone should have known that it was going to hurt my feefies too. You can't say that about just anything. So then basically everyone needs to shut up when in public or risk having a biased response team looking into your words. That's freaking stupid. It's an impossible standard. The pro-life speech is constitutionally protected, and there should be no adverse consequences for the speaker. It's all fine in theory, but the existence of an investigation is an adverse consequence in itself. Reasonable people know investigations aren't good. This is particularly troubling. Yeah, investigations aren't good. Who would have known that? Getting audited by the IRS is really fun. And it's not like you have to pay anything either. Oh no, you have to pay for them to audit you. Oh, that's great. Oh, investigations. Investigations, they're lovely. Yeah, I mean, it's not like they're going to go knocking on your doors or asking and harassing all your friends about anything that you've ever said or done. No, we love people. We take care of everyone. And by that, I don't mean at all we only take care of people that are immature enough to throw a hissy fit and not live a real life. I mean, we take care of you, too.
Here's what Hamza says. Substantial emotional harm equals my inherent cognitive bias that inhibits me from holding two opposing ideas in my head at the same time. Okay.
Okay, so let's go being an idiot.
Yeah. In England, we have this place called Speaker's Corner. It's in London. It's the same thing. He said he managed to stumble upon it and was very shocked. He just walked into a park and there it was, a bunch of rhetoric shouting religious and irreligious people.
Shouting rhetoric.
Yeah. Yeah, rhetoric, yeah.
God is real. God ain't real. God is real. God ain't real.
I mean, I'll send...
And perhaps,
really fun
perhaps a little bit higher level of sophistication, I'm assuming.
No, I mean...
God is real, and you're a poopy head. God ain't real, and you're a poopy head.
No, I don't think you're that far off. Let me find you. I'll send you this link via WhatsApp.
Okay. Continue reading this.
Yeah, go ahead.
So in our scenario... Yeah, reasonable people know investigations aren't good. This is particularly troubling since UM's administrators are state actors. State actors who serve as investigators, prosecutors, judges, and juries in their own inquiries. The state, he who pays the piper calls the tune, right? You're an employee of the state. In our scenario, a student spoke and the state investigated based on the content of the student's speech. This possibility should be disquieting to anyone with even a modicum of interest in protecting civil liberties. In practice, speech codes and bias response teams are not about protecting students from harm, but about exerting the state's power over its citizenry. And I'm going to add and say that I think that this has an awful lot to do with the idea of just conditioning people to the idea that the state is allowed to do that. You know, getting people used to the idea that bias response teams and speech codes and all these other different things are just the norm. So that whenever new regulations come out, people will just bend over and take it up the butt with no lube.
Yeah. Yes. Yes, indeed. I sent you the link too.
Let's see. Oh, the missoumag.missouri.edu. Okay, we'll go back to campus speech codes here. I'll look at that at after we're done with this article here.
Okay.
because I have it as a tab in the same browser that I'm screen capturing.
Right, yeah, no, go ahead.
So, in testimony to Congress, former Professor Brett Weinstein warned that campus free speech crisis is a symptom of a more sinister problem. What is occurring on college campuses is about power and control. Speech is impeded as a last resort, used when people or groups fail to self-censor in response to a threat of crippling stigma and the destruction of their capacity to earn. Colleges and universities actively promote the notion that earning a degree leads to greater personal income. Administrative investigations threaten a student's lifetime earnings, not just progress in their degree programs. The troika of speech codes, bias response teams, and administrative disciplinary hearings, which typically don't have due process protections, are slowly dragging state universities away from freedom and toward oppression. And that actually leads to a discussion of murder, slavery, and theft. Right? And what all these three do. You know, if you talk about, you know, forcing somebody into a situation that can impact their future, well, that is a form of slavery, right? Okay, so if we start with murder, and I'm actually going with life, liberty, and property, the three things that are important from a Lockean perspective. All right, so it's predicated upon this idea of self-ownership. So basically, if I own myself, then I own what I do, because it's an extension of myself. And if I have a right to that, if I have a right to myself, then I have a right to ultimately my life, my liberty, and my property. So taking away life is taking away my future and my present.
Yes.
Taking away liberty is taking away my present, so that would be slavery. And then also potentially the future if it as long as it continues.
Right.
And theft is actually stealing of the labor of my past. So basically, you're thinking, do I own myself in my entirety for the scope of my entire life, or what it would be, right? You know, before being murdered or something. Is so theft takes away your past, slavery takes away your present and potentially your future, and murder takes away your future and the moment immediately right at your present.
Yes.
So this is a form, then, if we take it and look at it from a 10,000-foot perspective, of slavery. You're taking away your present and actually manipulating the situation of one's present, such that it might have a severe impact on one's future. So in other words, if you don't play by the rules, if you don't play the game, then you're not going to get to play the game that you need to be playing after you spend your 4, 6, 8 years here, because you're going to be, you know, asking, would you like fries with that, instead of designing bridges, because clearly you need to be an SJW type in order to design bridges, or at least in order to get the piece of paper that says you can design bridges.
This may be ill-placed, but my dad would have something to say about the type of engineers that build bridges and comparing them to people who work at McDonald's anyway.
Well, people, yeah, all sorts, like electrical engineers, chemical engineers, I would say. Chemical and petrochemical and electrical are kind of the top of the heap, aren't they?
Yes, civil are at the bottom. My dad, I remember the first time. I know this might be a stupid tangent, but
go ahead.
It's a fond memory.
We're calling sacred cows, so go for it.
Yes. So my friend's dad is a civil engineer, and I was like, oh yeah, my friend's dad's an engineer. He's like, oh, what type? I was like, oh, I think civil. He's like, oh, that's too bad for him, or something. He's like, oh man, no, that's it was pretty funny. It's like a running joke within the engineering community is that civil engineers are.
Oh yeah.
Even though of course they're not Obviously, they're
No,
engineers.
and you can wind up having, very, very intelligent people that want to be civil engineers. I don't
Yes.
want to design circuitry. I don't want to. I want to look at infrastructure, or I want to look at depreciation of infrastructure and how are we going to city planning.
Right. Oh yeah.
I'm interested in that. So I mean,
Exactly.
if someone's interested in that, I'm not going to poo-poo them, but still,
No.
you pick that track, you know what you're going to get yourself into by all the other engineers. So
Oh yeah.
so that means you just need to be able to, dish it right back.
Yes, exactly. Just be quick of wit, and you'll be good.
Oh yeah. All you have to do is throw a few zingers in their direction, and they'll leave you alone.
Mm-hmm.
They'll actually respect you quite a bit. I've noticed.
Oh yeah.
Engineers in general, if you can throw zingers back in their direction, you're good.
Yeah, they like it. They're like, all
Physicists
right,
are a
you've
mixed
proved
bunch
it.
in that way, but yeah, engineers definitely like it.
Who are a mixed bunch? Chemists,
Physicists.
physicists. Interesting.
Chemists are also a mixed bunch, but yeah, but physicists, like, most of them are really cool.
Right.
Most of them are really cool.
Mm-hmm.
Others I don't want to touch. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily go and touch them, poke. That's kind of gross, but just walk up to a physicist, touch, and you just run away.
You're pretty cool. I want to touch you. Yeah. I might not be.
Can I touch you? Want to be my friend? I want to touch you. You're a physicist.
I like physics too.
I like physics. Can you sign my physics book?
Oh my god. Yeah, you might get some interesting reactions.
Oh,
I think you
boy.
should be worried of the physicist who is enjoying that. Yeah.
Can I lick my finger and put it in your ear? I like doing it to physicists.
Like God. Oh man.
Oh, but anyhow, going back to free speech. Can't imagine where. Hey, that would actually be assault. Like actually doing it. But walking up to somebody saying, "Can I put my finger in your ear?" I mean, I think that would be protected under free speech, would it not?
Yeah, it should be.
Yeah, so
Should be allowed to ask.
as would my right to say, no. Hold on, let me think a while longer. No.
It's funny that you mentioned that, because I think of, and this is something my dad does, is put the academic types in kind of socially uncomfortable situations. They're not all so socially acrobatic, and like some of them may be quick of wit under the right circumstances, but like also kind of socially awkward and uncomfortable. So if you throw zingers out at them, and they'll sort of just fumble them, it's really fun.
Oh yeah, I love zingers for that reason, and I actually used to suck at it, both receiving and throwing them, because I was thinking, do people really do this? That was literally my. It's like, do people really do this?
I was trained by my dad. He always, I mean, ever since I was little, sarcastic things. Like, I like would accidentally touch my milk, right? I'd accidentally like spill my milk on the table, and he's like, "Oh, do you have a drinking problem?" and I do it like, or like I'd screw up with my, I'd like drop some food or something, or I'd spill something. He'd be like, "Oh, Steven, don't do that." Like,
it's like I was well behaved until I hit puberty, and then after that, it was like all bets were just off. In terms of my sense of humor.
Yes.
My mom was like, "You were such a good boy," but then as soon as you like turned 11 or 12, it was like.
Yes. No. But no. My dad's always been doing the. He always sees like, no one can beat us in smartassery, Steven. Use that power wisely. That's what he says.
Oh boy. Anyhow, continuing.
Yes.
State legislators have noticed the progression and are taking action. 8 states have enacted laws protecting free speech on campus. Okay. I'm sorry, but that actually pisses me off.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you have a law as opposed to a right to free speech, if you have a law, then that is predicated upon the idea that the government can decide when to and when not to infringe upon a right. I mean, certainly the result might be desirable.
So it has a law. So it's, as I understand, a law protecting free speech. That's what it says. Is that what you read? Is that what you read? A law protecting the right to free speech in 8 states?
Yeah, a law protecting free speech on campus.
And it's interesting, you'd think we'd already have that. Don't we already have the Constitution for that? Like, I might be misunderstanding. I don't know much about government, but I would go ahead and say that. I would assume that the First Amendment.
That it covers that.
Okay.
The First Amendment covers that. So if you wind up making a law on the books that ultimately is invalidating the First Amendment due to the fact that you're basically saying, well, the state can actually determine when this right does and does not exist for you, it sets a precedent.
Mm-hmm.
Or at least once it goes through the judicial system, it will have set a precedent as to what it is that is constitutional. It's nasty. It's absolutely nasty. Like, people think that they're doing a favor, or people think that their politicians are doing them a favor, but really it's just knitting a deeper web.
Because it's invalidating the First Amendment, right? You're like, no one cares. And that ties back to me to marginal returns and stuff in economics. Like, marginally, we're looking at the law that was just enacted, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you're putting that law marginally in front of the First Amendment, like another layer.
Yeah, exactly.
And you look at that, and then you're looking at places that don't have this law, and then you're looking at places that do have this law, and then no one's thinking about the law that's already there, the First Amendment. Yeah, and Hamza just says, my physics teacher talked about a situation in which physics professors were getting students who were doing impressive work to sign contracts naively and losing all rights to their work. That's sort of bad.
So these students should not sign those contracts. That would be my my take.
They should read them at least before.
Yeah,
it is still a breach of trust, though. You'd think.
Well, it's a breach of trust, certainly, and I would say that whoever goes and makes you do that is a world-class poophead.
Yes.
But ultimately, I'd say that if you don't know better than to read a document that's set in front of you before signing it, you're kind of the sucker.
Indeed. Indeed. And they are taking advantage of the culture, like, it all, like the meme that I think of, it's not necessarily a meme, but I'll call it a meme since it's a reoccurring theme that's sometimes construed in a humorous way. Like the terms and conditions of Apple, like your terms and conditions, like no one wants to read them. So then, yeah, and people get in the habit of just not reading these terms. Oh, just agree to the terms and conditions. They just do it, etc. So that's right to be taken advantage of by people. That characteristic that people have to sort of ignore that stuff, just because so much of it is like, there's most of it, I'd say, like, you can ignore it. Like, I didn't read the terms and conditions on my phone. I plan to use it like a phone. I was like, well, I'm gonna get apps. I'm gonna use those apps. I'm not gonna do anything crazy with it. I'm not trying to even jailbreak it or anything. I'm like, well, I'm going to text people, call them, and use apps. I don't think I need to read the terms and conditions, because the usage of my phone clearly, like, that's clearly allowed. That clearly would be allowed. I don't think there's any confounding thing. But if I was a developer, I should definitely read the terms and conditions. So it's just taking advantage of that habit of people to ignore the fine details.
Mm-hmm.
The fine print, so to speak.
So 8 states have enacted laws protecting free speech on campus, and 16 other states have introduced similar legislation. State university governing boards are acting too. The University of Wisconsin's Board of Regents recently created a two-strikes policy punishing students who repeatedly impede others' free speech by disrupting events. Okay, by disrupting events. I mean, I would say, okay, by saying something, sure, no, but by, like, throwing rocks at people, well, I say just call the police.
Yeah.
And it's like disrupting events. That's also very
ambiguous.
Yeah. So
disruptions, yeah.
It's like what constitutes disrupting? Are you going to impede someone else's right to free speech?
What if they're
like, all right, heckling? That no, but then there's pretty much conduct in a venue, and then it's like, okay, if you're going to heckle, well, then get your butt kicked out, and you're perfectly and someone's perfectly within their rights to kick out hecklers,
right?
My talk, my rules, kind of a thing.
Yeah, exactly.
So while the desire to promote free speech by stopping the heckler's veto is admirable, the policy commits the same error speech codes do. Both limit free speech, limit freedom, and allow universities to oppress speech, but for a different reason. Speech codes and bias response teams chill free speech. But so does the two strikes policy. It's another example of the state exerting control over speech. State colleges and universities can avoid First Amendment lawsuits, scrutiny from the Department of Justice, and legislative interference by jettisoning speech codes, ending bias response teams, and adopting the University of Chicago Statement on Freedom of Expression. Michigan's minor policy revisions got them out of the news cycle, but they didn't solve the underlying problem. Speech codes are incompatible with the First Amendment. The sooner state colleges and universities end the practice, the better.
Yeah.
This was written by John Carroll, who earned a PhD in higher education administration from the University of Texas at Austin and served in academic leadership at a large for-profit university. He currently serves as Vice President of Customer Success at a cybersecurity firm, London Security Solutions. John lives with his family outside of Austin, Texas. Follow him on Twitter at @RadicalProf, or email him at john.carroll@radicalprofessor.com. So you can get a hold of the author of this article if you'd like to discuss this. And when I do post this as a video, I'll actually go and throw this link into the chat.
Yeah, I think you can do that on Twitch too, right?
Yeah, I think that you're allowed to send links in, or at least streamers are allowed to send links in chat. Yeah, physicists are kinky people, Hamza. Very kinky. Alright, I'm trying to think. Is the situation such that you have to be subscribed in order to be able to type in the chat? Because that would
Nope, I don't think so.
Okay.
I just typed and I haven't even followed yet, but I will now.
Okay.
Anyone can chat, yeah.
Oh, great. Well, good. And if there winds up being any issues, alright, so there is no followers only mode. All messages are allowed on videos.
Yes.
Great.
Awesome.
Alright, well that works. So yeah, all campus speech codes are incompatible with the First Amendment and should be abolished. I am in 100% agreement with that.
Yes. Unless it's a private university, as you said, right?
Yeah.
And they can do
in a private university, then that's, my house, my university, my rules.
Yep. And you could since it is a private university, and it is their rules, they could do some funny things.
Oh yeah. You can say, everyone needs to dress up as a purple panda suit or in a purple dinosaur suit and sing Barney the Purple Dinosaur song before dinner if you want to eat in the lunch hall. They can come up with whatever rules they want. It's their university.
Yeah, that's what I was picturing. Just random shit like that. Funny thing.
You can compel speech.
Yes. Oh yeah. Man. I'm just my mind is just going off with a bunch of stupid things we could do. But anyway, we should move on to the Einstein.
Things we can do. There's the calling Einstein a racist. Is perfect for those who can't compete with his accomplishments.
Oh God, this is such a reoccurring theme in human nature.
And if you're interested in reading some very good satire, this dude Hans Fien he's pretty amazing. He's definitely on the right-hand side of the bell curve, though how far he is, I don't know. But he has some pretty good satire. He wrote an interesting. Well, I'll just say look at his profile at some point if you're interested. I'll send you this link and I'll put it into the chat, assuming that I can. Yeah, and then you can go and see whatever you like from his profile as well if you're interested. But he says, I regret, or in 1922, Albert Einstein had some private thoughts that are roughly as offensive as the 15 Real Patriots Against Mexico.blogtown.net articles your aunt shared on Facebook last week.
Oh, Facebook. Oh,
I regret to inform you that the Knights of Actually have come for Albert Einstein.
Oh, God.
For years, it seemed, the keyboard warriors would limit themselves to a once-a-year battle with the legacy of Christopher Columbus. Actually, Columbus was a racist, oppressive, slavery-loving colonialist. They would tell everyone celebrating the Italian explorer's accomplishment each October, clearly this nullifies his other accomplishments, so let's throw his name in the dustbin of history by celebrating Indigenous Peoples' Day instead. Eventually, the Knights grew hungry for the reputations of the other historic figures with American cities named after them. Actually, George Washington and Thomas Jefferson owned slaves. Actually, Abraham Lincoln was racist. Sure, they were monumental figures in building and preserving our nation, the Knights have actually told us, but they weren't as enlightened on issues as race as we are, so let's burn their monuments to the ground. Once again, it seemed there were limits to the reputational bloodlust. Surely these increasingly absurd battles would end when the Knights of Actually saw the breadth of their domain and wept tears of joy because there were no presidents left to conquer. But then they came for Einstein, Albert Einstein. In a recent article for the New York Times, Yonette Joseph and Tiffany May discuss a recently published translation of diaries Einstein kept while on a tour of Asia in 1922. They write, Mr. Rosencrantz said in an email on Thursday that the book provides an insight into his prejudices, opinions, and attitudes on the members of foreign nations, but also on the national/ethnic groups he belonged to himself, the Jews, the Germans, and the Europeans. He added that it also confronts us with the limits of his humanism, his intellectual elitism. I think a lot of comments strike us as pretty unpleasant. What he says about the Chinese in particular, he also told The Guardian. They're kind of in contrast to the public image of the great humanitarian icon. I think it's quite a shock to read those and contrast them with his more public statements, he added.
Okay, well, can I interject something here?
Oh, please do.
I saw some article that was essentially basically, it was because the Chinese people also saw, it was in response to what he said about the Chinese. and they were like, "Yeah, we agree. China back then sucked. We're not surprised at all that he said those things. We would not want to live there either, and we've gotten a lot better since then." It was really funny. This seems to be a recurring theme that I see. I don't know if it's just an artifact of Chinese culture. I don't know. They don't seem to tolerate or really care that much about bullshit and fluff as much as, I guess, more Western countries.
More Western countries, and especially the SJW people in the United States. If you look at places that have insanely high GDP per capita, the ones that are sucking off of the system, and that also includes non-working wives of people that are making a lot of money. I mean, I'm not saying that everyone's sucking off the system, but lots of people that suck off the system can find nothing to do but to poo-poo situations,
right?
And so on. Exactly.
It's just one of those things too much. I saw another example of this where this white girl, this like pretty white girl, basically for her prom, she wore some like traditional Chinese dress or something.
It wasn't even a traditional Chinese dress. It was form-fitting. Traditional Chinese dress would have looked like
yeah. You said it's just form-fitting, right? It's not even like some. It's just like a Chinese style dress. Like whatever. It's not. Yeah. It's not some.
Yeah.
And there's so many like people in her comments like cultural appropriation, blah blah blah.
Yeah, you ask the Chinese people, and the Chinese people are.
And the Chinese are like, "Oh my gosh, she looks so pretty. She looks nice. Yeah, she looks pretty. Like, yeah, we're happy to see. We're happy to see, you know, some Chinese like
appropriating some aspects of Chinese culture and throwing in your own Western fun stuff. I mean,
yeah, like they're like, yeah, we're happy to see our dresses on people elsewhere. You know, we're happy to see it spread across, right? Like other people like it. You know, it's almost like it's good. Like it's
we
nice.
had tacos for dinner last night. Wait until the Mexicans get up in arms about that. Like
exactly.
Like, hold on, let me think about that just a little bit. Crap, I had Chinese last Tuesday as well.
Appropriation, yeah, exactly, and that's essentially treating the spread and the literally, it's not called appropriation. It's if anything, it's appreciation. She's like, wow, like this. I like this dress. This style dress is nice, and
I'm appropriating. I'm appropriating the Arabs too.
Benefit.
I'm drinking coffee. Arab appropriation. I'm drinking coffee. I'm doing algebra too. That's from them. Oh man, I can come up with all sorts of things that I'd be appropriating.
Right.
Not that I appreciate or use them. I'm doing it just because I'm a baddie. I'm such a terrible person.
Cultures and members of said culture generally benefit from other cultures and other regions, basically embracing their things.
Free trade. Like, that's like pretty good, ain't it?
For like people like Mexican food, like how many Spanish people and Mexican people can make a living in the U.S. by making their traditional food, and people are like, wow, I really like this. Let's go,
and then I can go. Yeah, then I can go to the city centrum here in Turku, and go to. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily eat there because it's actually not that good American food. It's like horrible. But let's say that it was done right. Let's say I just went there and I made like a 50-gallon. You know, a cauldron full of chili, and then just started serving it in the town square. People they get a dose of American culture, and probably feel like they were crapping fire for the next 2 days too.
People like that's just it sorts back to economics and free trade and stuff. Like diversity of thought, diversity of culture is good. Like that brings, I mean, there's times when it creates strife at times, but that's completely beside the point. As far as like food and stuff, like there's nothing like it's good that that other people are appreciating things that would previously be sort of region locked, and it's stupid. It's incredibly stupid to be like, oh, that's appropriate, like that. You're like, what? What is the cultural appropriation? I don't even know what it is. Let me look up the
all right. cultural appropriation has a sliding definition. The definition slides back and forth.
Okay, so what Google says is cultural appropriation is a concept dealing with the adoption of the elements of a minority culture by members of the dominant culture. Cultural elements which may have deep meaning to the original culture may be reduced to exotic fashion or toys by those from the dominant culture.
Okay, so does that mean that? So it's a thought crime. It's a thought crime.
Yeah.
It's or not crime necessarily, unless it actually becomes a crime. But it's basically saying that a particular attitude is so bad that it's better to just not do whatever it is.
I mean, if we were, for example, what are the little are those called toras? The hats that Jewish people wear?
No.
Or,
No. The Torah is the first is their first 5 books of the Bible.
Okay, never mind. Obviously, I'm not the most culturally.
You can tell how bad I am with that too.
Right. But it's not like people like, for example, that's something, religious. It's not like there's a trend in the U.S. using them as diapers or something like that. I could say might be taken as offensive, right?
Well, it's the yeah.
Like if you're blatantly like defaming or like essentially disrespecting and I mean that would literally be shitting on an important cultural on an important piece to another culture. Like obviously that's disrespectful, and you deserve to be like criticized for that.
But it's still within someone's rights. I mean, now if I take but if I steal someone else's, take a dump on it and put it back in his drawer, well that's a little something else, right?
Yes, but
criticism. I mean, it's the same as like okay, I'm a Christian. Let's say somebody bought a Bible and used the pages for toilet paper. Okay, that doesn't say anything about me. That says something about the person who's doing it. I mean, I'm not going to go and get myself bent out of shape, but I know that if somebody came over to my house and started ripping pages out of my Bible using it for toilet paper, And
this concept of dominant and minority cultures, to me, is relativistic bullcrap. Like, first of all, if we were talking about it on a world, like just a world view, like we would say that the Chinese are, the Indian, whatever. One of them is the dominant culture, right? Like they have the largest body of people.
But it is completely relative. I mean, if you go and you look at GDP, total GDP, GDP per capita, those are all measurements too.
Yeah, exactly.
Then there's like total amount of national resources under control versus amount utilized. So is greater or lesser utilization a better thing? There's just so many metrics that you can go by.
Yes.
Richness of culture and history. I mean, people can go and say that, although I think that's a little bit more difficult to quantify. You definitely can't.
Yeah, that is incredibly difficult to quantify.
You can go and basically say that they that rape, pillage, and plunder are inferior to they that don't. That kind of a case could be made. Right. Of course, the case could be made that they that rape, pillage, and plunder are better than the people that don't.
Mm-hmm. And then there's the case that like maybe in the past a certain body of people raped, pillaged, and plundered, but now they don't, and then you're essentially, and then it's just this whole thing.
Oh yeah, or like maybe a certain color of people wound up holding slaves a century and a half ago, and now everyone with that color, regardless of whether or not they ever had a slave or it's all their problem. Yes. Slavery has existed since humanity has existed in its present sense. Indeed, being an indentured servant, a slave in ancient Babylon, was commensurate with being an employee today. It really wasn't bad.
Right.
Or at least relatively, it wasn't bad.
Yes.
Being a slave in Rome, relatively, it wasn't bad. It was just employment. But now people, they don't want to go and call it. Being a slave means basically not having the freedom to decide what to do with your time, with your present. So, working a 9-to-5 job means that from 9 to 5 you are someone else's slave.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you may have entered into an agreement, but if you think that those agreements are the only ways of getting through life, well then, you have the mindset of a slave. Whereas if you have a growth mindset, you decide, okay, I'm going to invest, I'm going to grow and do things, well then I'm not a slave. But we're kind of getting a little bit derailed from the whole topic.
Yes.
What does Einstein say in his diaries? This theory of relativity thing could come in really handy at eliminating inferior races with an atom bomb. Let's enslave uppity Chinese women who want to study quantum mechanics. No.
No.
Of the Japanese, he says, intellectual needs of this nation seem to be weaker than their artistic ones. Natural disposition. Of the Chinese, he considered some that he saw to be industrious, filthy, obtuse people, and said it would be a pity if these Chinese supplant all other races. For the likes of us, the mere thought is unspeakably dreary. So, that does seem to be pretty, to recap, but that doesn't mean that's ever, that's like me going and seeing a swath of any culture and making a statement. You can't say there's a blanket statement about everybody over all time periods.
Said at least, and they said that some seem to be, etc.
Yeah.
And he put a question mark, natural disposition, question mark. Like, this is obviously someone just not familiar
He's
with.
thinking, he's trying to put things together and writing it all down.
Yes, literally. It's it's like pretty harmless, and it's just
ultimately this is the reason that I try to have a decent memory, and that's why I forget a whole bunch of things, is because I don't write things down. And I don't write things down because I don't want morons getting their hands on things that I write and taking them out of context and twisting my words around. I know it may seem stupid, but ultimately, I think I'm probably jaded from the time that someone got into my diary and read it. It's just one of those things that I
exactly.
My thoughts are my thoughts. But,
Exactly.
Einstein was stupid enough to write it down, so obviously, posthumously he can go and have it thrown up in his face.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever. So we're going to continue. To recap, unlike Columbus, Washington, or Jefferson, who inflicted real pain upon many people through real actions, in 1922 Einstein had some private thoughts that are roughly as offensive as the 15 Real Patriots Against Mexico.blogtown.net articles your aunt shared on Facebook last week. Einstein then wrote those unsavory thoughts in a private journal, never spoke them aloud publicly, and never lived a life in accordance with them. The horror!
Oh my god.
So fighting prejudice is too hard, so we just post memes. Why is this news for the Knights of Actually? The answer is fairly simple. Their goal is not to eliminate injustice. If it were, they'd spend their time fighting against the slavery, oppression, and racism that still run rampant in the world now, instead of attacking historical figures who are increasingly less guilty of perpetuating slavery, oppression, and racism. Likewise, it's hard to believe they're seeking a genuine debate about how much a man's moral failings ought to affect his legacy, since the answer is always the same. Terminate with extreme prejudice the one with extreme or modest prejudice. Rather, it seems the Knights of Actually's goal is to devise an ethical system that gives them bragging rights over the far more accomplished figures of history. I'll say that again. Rather, it seems the Knights of Actually's goal is to devise an ethical system that gives them bragging rights over the far more accomplished figures of history. For those of you, and I didn't know what this was for a while, but I think it's kind of self-evident. This is called virtue signaling, and it's a poop-headed thing.
Can you look at that up? Because I've heard this phrase, but I've never.
Oh, it's basically saying and or doing something for the sole purpose of being able to lord it over somebody else and say, I'm morally better than you because I'm taking offense on behalf of Chinese people.
Oh, God, that reminds me of med school admissions, kind of. That's a lot of virtue signaling.
Sorry, that's Oh boy.
Do you know what I mean by that? I'm sure.
Anyhow, moving right along. Self-righteousness, jealousy, and laziness is a bad combination. But it's an increasingly popular one. It's the official cocktail of those who want the favor of God and the world and are envious of those who appear to possess it, but are unwilling to do any real work to merit what others have.
Real work.
So, to gain righteousness without breaking a sweat, the knights have actually developed an ethical system rigged in their favor. Virtue signaling. If you hold very progressive views on race, that alone makes you righteous, and you don't need to do anything else, the knights have actually insist. Likewise, if you don't hold progressive views on race, you are unrighteous, and nothing else you do matters. Ever so conveniently we hold very progressive views on race, so actually we're more righteous than all the great figures of history who didn't, despite the fact that we've never done anything that warrants mentioning in a history book. So sure, the knights tell us, Columbus discovered the New World after navigating a few wooden ships across half the planet by looking at flecks of light in the sky, and thereby ushering in an era that would culminate in founding the greatest and freest country in the history of the world. And sure, we've never discovered anything other than more efficient ways to give strangers HPV courtesy of smartphone hookup apps. But Columbus was racist and we're not, so actually we're better than Columbus.
More efficient ways to give people HPV. Oh my god.
This dude is awesome. I love his stuff.
That's funny. That's good writing.
Sure, Washington, Jefferson, and Lincoln built a mighty nation based upon the principles of God-given rights, individual freedoms, and universal human dignity, but they didn't fully understand the spirit of these principles. We did with regard to race, although not so much with regard to the unborn, but how can we maximize our HPV-giving potential without abortion on demand? So actually, we're better than all those guys with monuments and statues in our racist nation's capital. Your achievements mean nothing if you hold a bad idea. Later in their essay, Joseph and May tell us that Einstein's racism-scented diaries add an unexpected twist to the legacy of man who, in no uncertain terms, evolved. In other words, sure, Albert Einstein was a brilliant scientist whose work helped the United States save the world from tyranny and worldwide slaughter, and sure, Einstein spoke about race relations in ways that were light years beyond how many of his contemporaries spoke, but unlike us, Einstein wasn't always super woke. So we don't need to feel bad about not even understanding theoretical physics, let alone failing to better the world through it. All of this is, of course, an exercise in absurdity. Discovering America is better than discovering that Columbus was a sinner. Building a government atop the words "all men are created equal" is better than copying and pasting those words onto your Facebook profile picture. Issuing the Emancipation Proclamation is better than having a black friend. Developing the theory of relativity is better than tut-tutting the problematic private thoughts of dead scientists. Whenever the knights have actually attacked these accomplishments, they're not highlighting the horrors of racism. They're highlighting the foolishness of an ethical system that says, I don't have to find or build or create or learn or develop or accomplish anything in my life. In order to be better than history's greatest figures, all I have to do is not be racist.
I'm better than them. If you can't beat them at their own game, just switch up the game, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just change the rules.
And this guy is also a Lutheran pastor, so you're going to actually get a little bit of an understanding of where I come at from with regard to some of these things. First, I think he's one of the actually one of the most articulate people that, in most ways, concurs with me on things. In Romans 5, St. Paul says, "For if because of one man's trespass death reigned through that one man, much more will those who receive the abundance of grace and the free gift of righteousness reign in life through the one man, Jesus Christ." Paul is saying, don't bother competing with your neighbors, dead or living, for the favor of God. Don't bother trying to tear down the works of others to show God how righteous you are by comparison. You aren't. Like all other men, you have failed to make yourself righteous through your works, but out of love, God sent Christ to be righteous in your place. That's what Christ did at the cross, and all who believe in him now possess his righteousness. So tearing other people down doesn't make you good. The Knights of Actually have come for Einstein. Unless we change their way of thinking, they'll soon be insisting that PBS should shove Mr. Rogers down the memory hole because rumor has it he used the term colored in 1948. If we want to stop that from happening, we should certainly aim to deprogram the Knights of the cultural Marxist impulses that make them interpret every historical accomplishment through the lens of power and oppression. But even more so, we need to show them they won't find the divine favor they seek by tearing apart the legacies of explorers, presidents, or physicists. We need to convince the Knights of Actually that they don't need to diminish or disqualify the works of their neighbor to gain God's favor. We need to show them that righteousness is not a zero-sum game. It is a gift given freely from the heart of a loving God through the blood of His Son. A gift that frees us to evaluate the accomplishments of historical figures honestly, because it disposes of the self-righteousness that otherwise clouds our judgment. All men are sinners, and no sinner can make himself acceptable to God, we need to tell the Knights of Actually. But some sinners manage to make the world a better place for their neighbors than other sinners do. Columbus, Washington, Jefferson, and Einstein have all done a better job of this than you have, but Jesus died for you, so get over it. So, Pastor Feen is a Lutheran pastor in Illinois and the creator of Lutheran Satire, a series of comical videos intended to teach the Lutheran faith. You can follow him on Twitter at Hans Feen.
Yes, and while I'm, not particularly religious myself, I can still agree with basically the whole. I can agree with everything essentially. You don't even need to. For example, the prospect that all people are sinners and all people do bad things, that's self-evident, right? Even the small religious bit he put in there is very, I like how he did it. It wasn't, he didn't, there was no gatekeeping at all in this. So yeah, this is good writing.
He's, I'd love to meet the guy, but unfortunately that would mean I have to go about 4,600 miles.
It's quite a...
Or 4,500 miles. Yeah, but
regardless.
Yeah, but if ever I happen to find myself in his vicinity, I might wind up going to his church on Sunday.
Yeah, and it's so stupid. I don't know. People I don't know if they forget. I'm assuming they forget. I hope they forget. I hope it's not intentional. But the cultural lens that you're seeing things through is just very different from the cultural lens 50 years ago, 100 years ago, etc. Whatever. And by comparing everything that happened in the past to the well, and this is not even there's the fallacy starts way before this, but this is just a tendency, as people to compare using the cultural lens of today and the expectations of today. They compare people in the past to that, and they act like people in the past who did things that were maybe considered normal at that time, but aren't normal today. They will consider those people, bad and egregious because they don't, they weren't way ahead of their time in upholding the values that we consider to be good. Mm-hmm. And that's just obviously extremely unfair and silly. So, but it happens all the time. And the stuff about Einstein, what Einstein said, and Einstein was. He was a vocal humanitarian, and we're taking his diary pieces, right? It's not like he was spouting to the world how bad the Japanese were or the Chinese, and he didn't even say, but he said they seem more focused on artistic accomplishment than intellectual. Is that that's not negative in and of itself at all to me. Oh wow, they focus on this rather than that. He's not saying, well, they're stupid because they don't focus on what we he didn't say anything of that. It's very and then he natural disposition, then he's a question mark, literally he's positing a question, And then the Chinese thing, like, he's like, well, yeah, I find that boring, and I don't like their lifestyle. Essentially, and it's like, yeah, he's
But
not
the
like,
fact of the matter is, right? There's unskilled labor, there's skilled labor, there's all sorts of different ways of contributing to the economy, and if the economy requires something, well then, if you provide something that other people need, then you'll get compensated. And if it's a question between doing that and starving, well, isn't the logical course of action obvious? And Hans made a nice point.
Oh yeah, you go first.
About MLK had an affair, but his civil rights work clearly means nothing. He seriously doubts that diary excerpts of Einstein represent his polished intellectual dialogue. He's literally being policed for his thoughts after his death. Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. It's his diary, man. Like, come on. Like, you're being the thought police. Literally. You can't think certain things. You can't have these, like, holy shit, that is really, I mean, I hope anyone can see how, if you're being policed for your thoughts, I hope anyone can see how, like, how controlling and how negative that is and bad. Like, you're not allowed to think certain things. And this reminds me again of when I was young. My mom was probably 2 or 3 again. That's when I started to act out. Apparently, I was extremely well behaved as a baby, and never cried, really. Only, at least, especially in public, I recognize that I'm not supposed to cry there. Stuff like that. My parents were like, oh yeah, he's gonna be, it's gonna be a fun time. And I don't know, probably 2 or 3. My mom would say things, the phrase, like, don't even think about it.
Mm-hmm.
And I would always, this was my response. I was like, Mom, I'm thinking about it. Instantly, what I would say every time. The phrase went over my head a little bit. But yeah, it's don't even think about it again. You can't really control someone's thoughts and personal stuff in that way. It's not very positive at all.
No, but the whole idea of playing thought police is, that's actually part of the whole. I don't know how else to put it. The way that I look at the world, right? I look at the world as people wanting I think a lot of human behavior is explained by people wanting to appear good, and failing at that, wanting to at least appear better than somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
And so, if you look at things through that lens, a lot of people's seemingly irrational behavior can be explained quite nicely. Now, if you then all of a sudden start looking at things through the lens of, okay, rather than saying we're all good and environment makes us bad, if we go and say we're all bad, but still somehow, trying really hard and having an idea of virtue, we can, still function and act as good people in spite of ourselves, then that changes the entire, way that you look at things. I mean, if I can just go flat out and say that if you were able to spy on me and see my thoughts, for example, I wouldn't want that. Because I mean, I can't think of anybody who's honest and alive that would say that, because there are lots of bad thoughts that go through somebody's head. Now, most people don't act on it, but why don't people act on it? Because, well, they know that it's bad.
They recognize. Yeah.
No, I'm really, really good. I don't really have these thoughts. And lots of people, if they were given a bunch of power, I mean, just think about what happens to lottery winners, right? Lottery winners don't get rich. Lottery winners get a gigantic pile of cash and wind up going into debt even more than what they were before.
Yeah.
Okay, so what does that tell you about people's spending habits? Going and gambling and spending on hookers and a whole bunch of, depreciating assets. I mean, how good is that?
Especially people who are spending their money on lottery tickets. That's just, you're not getting the intellectual or the economic cream of the crop there, I suppose.
No. But even so, it also happens when people get a windfall of another sort, an inheritance or something.
Yes.
Basically, you give people either money or power, and you can quickly see what kind of a person they are. People will not change too much depending upon their socioeconomical level. Power and money are a great enabler. So if you want to ruin somebody, or rather have somebody ruin themselves, then make them get rich without having to do anything for it.
Hamza says, I've thought some incredibly socially malignant, perverted, obsessive, compulsive thoughts. Clearly, prison is where I should be.
Exactly. And,
Yeah.
I would say so have all of us, especially people with the Myers-Briggs middle letters NT.
Oh, boy. Oh, boy.
And then lots of, especially ENTJs, and sometimes INTJs actually act out on them.
Mm-hmm. ENTJs, my friend who's an ENTJ, she has to suffer and hold her tongue and just.
Oh wow! Well then she has quite a bit of self-control.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I wouldn't have I guessed that she's an ENTJ by thinking about each letter. I was like, okay, probably an ENTJ.
But then,
I know
but
she
then
said
there are
she's
certain
extroverted.
other things that
Right, but I was like, but man, she doesn't. The other ENTJ I knew was not very filtered, and she just made enemies of everyone really quickly. But yeah, this one is very. She just suffers inside with what people do. But yeah. Oh boy.
So already we're an hour and 15 minutes into the stream. This is excellent.
Mm-hmm.
That means we can jump to our next topic, which is education.
Oh yeah.
We've been going through The Underground History of American Education by John Taylor Gatto. It's a really, really wonderful book. I'd highly recommend picking it up if you haven't. And even if you don't live in the United States, it definitely gives a look into the Prussian-inspired system of education and the idea of what schooling was designed to and does do to people in terms of homogenization of society and so on. In fact, if you also reading a few of the pieces of advice that Fichte gave to the ruling class, that tells an awful lot about the goals of the educational system, even if the administrators of said goals are completely clueless as to what the goals are. Administrators meaning, of course, teachers and school administration, and even school boards to some extent. Anyhow, we will switch over to our read layout again and look at the new Dumbness. Ordinary people send their children to school to get smart. But what modern schooling teaches is dumbness. It's a religious idea gone out of control. You don't have to accept that, though, to realize this kind of economy would be jeopardized by too many smart people who understand too much. I won't ask you to take that on faith. Be patient. I'll let a famous American publisher explain to you the secret of our global financial success in just a little while. Be patient. Old-fashioned dumbness used to be simple ignorance. Now it is transformed from ignorance into permanent mathematical categories of relative stupidity like gifted and talented, mainstream, special ed. Categories in which learning is rationed for the good of a system of order. Dumb people are no longer merely ignorant. Now they are indoctrinated, their minds conditioned with substantial doses of commercially prepared disinformation dispensed for tranquilizing purposes. Well, let me make this a little bit smaller. There we go. Jacques Ellul, whose book Propaganda is a reflection on the phenomenon, warned us that Prosperous children are more susceptible than others to the effects of schooling, because they are promised more lifelong comfort and security for yielding wholly. Critical judgment disappears altogether, for in no way can there ever be collective critical judgment. The individual can no longer judge for himself, because he inescapably relates his thoughts to the entire complex of values and prejudices established by propaganda. With regard to political situations, he is given ready-made value judgments, invested with the power of truth by the word of experts. The new dumbness is particularly deadly to middle and upper middle class kids already made shallow by multiple pressures to conform imposed by the outside world on their usually lightly rooted parents. When they come of age, they are certain they must know something because their degrees and licenses say they do. They remain so convinced until an unexpectedly brutal divorce, a corporate downsizing in midlife, or panic attacks of meaninglessness upset the precarious balance of their incomplete humanity, their stillborn adult lives. Alan Bullock, the English historian, said evil was a state of incompetence. If true, our school adventure has filled the 20th century with evil. Ellul puts it this way: the individual has no chance to exercise his judgment either on principal questions or on their implication. This leads to the atrophy of a faculty not comfortably exercised under the best of conditions. Once personal judgment and critical faculties have disappeared or have atrophied, they will not simply reappear when propaganda is suppressed. Years of intellectual and spiritual education would be needed to restore such faculties. The propagandee, if deprived of one's propaganda, will immediately adopt another. This will spare him the agony of finding himself vis-a-vis some event without a ready-made opinion. Once the best children are broken to such a system, they disintegrate morally, becoming dependent on group approval. A national merit scholar in my own family once wrote that her dream was to be a small part in a great machine. It broke my heart. What kids dumbed down by schooling can't do is to think for themselves or ever be at rest for very long without feeling crazy. Stupefied boys and girls reveal dependence in many ways easily exploitable by their knowledgeable elders. According to all official analysis, dumbness isn't taught, as I claim, but is innate in a great percentage of what has come to be called the workforce. Workforce itself is a term that should tell you much about the mind that governs modern society. According to official reports, only a small fraction of the population is capable of what you and I call mental life. Creative thought, analytical thought, judgmental thought, a trio occupying the three highest positions on Bloom's taxonomy of educational objectives. Just how small a fraction would shock you. According to experts, the bulk of the mob is hopelessly dumb, even dangerously so. Perhaps you're a willing accomplice to this social coup which revived the English class system. Certainly you are if your own child has been rewarded with a gifted and talented label by your local school. This is what Dewey means by proper social order. If you believe nothing can be done for the dumb except kindness because it's biology, the bell curve model, if you believe capitalist oppressors have ruined the dumb because they are bad people, the neo-Marxist model, if you believe dumbness reflects depraved moral fiber, the Calvinist model, or that it's nature's way of disqualifying boobies from the reproduction sweepstakes, the Darwinian model, or nature's way of providing someone to clean your toilet, the pragmatic elitist model, or that it's evidence of bad karma, the Buddhist model, if you believe any of the various explanations given for the position of the dumb in the social order we have, then you will be forced to concur that a vast bureaucracy is indeed necessary to address the dumb. Otherwise, they would murder us in our beds. The shocking possibility that dumb people don't exist in sufficient numbers to warrant the careers devoted to tending to them will seem incredible to you. Yet, that is my proposition. Mass dumbness first had to be imagined. It isn't real. Once the dumb are wished into existence, they serve valuable functions. As a danger to themselves and others, they have to be watched, classified, disciplined, trained, medicated, sterilized, ghettoized, cajoled, coerced, jailed. To idealists, they represent a challenge, reprobates to be made socially useful. Either way you want it, hundreds of millions of perpetual children require paid attention from millions of adult custodians. An ignorant horde to be schooled one way or another.
Yep.
So
he's such a good writer.
Oh yeah, and you know, even if people are slower or faster at accomplishing certain things, people are still, especially people considered dumb, are way more capable than you might think. The thing is that conditioning thing is very strong. If implicitly people are told you are dumb enough, most people will believe it. Because we still do wind up having the hierarchical lizard brain thing going on. And that can easily hijack higher judgment. You know, it's easy for people to think, well, I don't actually know better. You know, people that have been beaten down their whole life, I don't really know better. I'll just outsource my thinking to someone else. You know, being timid. And essentially then being a slave of someone else and someone else's opinion and someone else's paradigm, etc.
Yeah. And when people are treated as, or at least when people are given the label, either explicitly or implicitly, whatever, of being slow or dumb or what have you, they suffer from the burden of lowered expectations. And it's a self-perpetuating. Yep. Yeah. Exactly that.
Self-perpetuating cycle and self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yes. Yeah. Once you don't expect stuff like what once you don't expect something of someone, why would they do it? They're not going to do it. Especially, I mean, and I'm talking about in like the paradigm of schooling. Like when a teacher doesn't, like, I'm not going to go out my way to do something the teacher doesn't expect me to do. Probably, maybe.
It's rare. It's rare. I mean, I would even say that, even in a marriage, it happens that way. That, well, I can say about my expectations and my wife. If I have higher expectations, she lives up to them. If I have lower expectations, she lives up to them. If my wife has higher expectations of me, I live up to them. If she has lower expectations of me, I live up to them. These other aspects of social life are important. And when you wind up having the moral fiber of an entire society gone and taken to the dump, you can't expect that it won't have any consequences.
Yep. Oh yeah.
That's the reason that Caleb in his stream, which by the way, I highly recommend following Caleb Beers, if on YouTube, and you could find his other social media stuff on Quora and so on. But that's why Caleb so often takes a dump on modernity in his streams. It's because it's a cancer. It's very, very bad, and it sets up the framework for some very destructive behaviors. Indeed. Or it sets up the framework for destruction, period.
Oh yeah. That is for sure. And yeah, it's really, I don't know, I'm thinking of character traits in kids, and even like I'm thinking about the kids mostly at the right side of the bell curve at this point, but the complacency and the arrogance donned by many of the moderately gifted, for example, can be explained through since their expectations are just this, which is easy for someone like that to meet. They're like, oh, they get this reward feedback loop that's essentially really it's deleterious to them because it's lowered expectations. It's them. They're being compared to people. They're not being compared to themselves. They're being compared to the average, which whatever that is, and however easy that is to quantify. But they get this idea in their head that they, have no problems and are infallible, and it's subconsciously or something like that. And it precipitates in negative character traits. And stuff like that. And then that doesn't serve anyone well. And I've seen many a student get or it will sometimes precipitate in entitlement as well, where they expect to just get things given to them and not struggle and stuff like that. So you sent me a link?
Yes, I did. This is a few meditations.
Cool.
And I think this actually speaks to something rather important. Unfortunately, I'm having a little bit of a I'm going to see if this actually works, because I may wind up having to change some of the croppings in order to actually be able to. Yeah, in order to be able to read this next thing.
I can read it if you want.
I'd like our viewers to be able to see it too, but yes,
okay.
It's perfectly fine with me if you read.
Cool. Well, 1 second, just needs to load. Computer is being...
We'll be starting with some meditation. The meditation about what Apollonius was teaching.
1 sec, I need to get down the med. Okay. And then which book?
Book 1.
Let's see. Tell me when you'd like me to start.
Just let me finish doing this. Make it a little smaller. The layers correct. And there we go. So right. From Apollonius.
Alright. So... from Apollonius, okay. From Apollonius I learned freedom of will and undeviating steadiness of purpose, and to look to nothing else, not even for a moment, except to reason, and to always be the same, and to be always the same, in sharp pains, on the occasion of the loss of a child, and in long illness, and to see clearly in a living example that the same man can be both resolute and yielding, and not peevish in giving his instruction, and to have had before my eyes a man who clearly considered his experience and his skill in expounding philosophical principles as the smallest of his merits. And from him I learned how to receive from friends what are esteemed favors, without being either humbled by them or letting them pass unnoticed.
So the freedom of will and undeviating steadiness of purpose. That is important, and that is a character trait. That is something that parents especially, I think, should be and are technically, whether they actually do it, but should be responsible for instilling in their children. Freedom of will and undeviating steadiness of purpose. How many people wind up having their purpose and their wills completely just twisted, deformed by school?
A lot.
How many people wind up living the life someone else wants them to live? I mean, this is no joking matter. You know, I'm not going to go and say be who you want to be because, well, whatever. You know, you can be whatever you want to be, and well, however that all works, because you know you can't be anything that you want to be. That's delusional. But out of all the paths that are there in front of you, you have a lot of choice.
Yes.
And well, you know, we spend a bit of time on Quora, and I see a lot of these questions that I only have an IQ of something. Can I do this?
Yes.
Okay, that you know, just the that idea shows an incredibly defeatist attitude.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, like, I feel sorry because it's like on one hand, it's like, no, just don't ask that question. Just do what you're going to do, and in doing it, you're going to develop as a person and maybe learn some other things. You never know what life is going to throw at you. I wanted to become a pediatric neurosurgeon. I'm not cutting people's heads open right now.
Right.
I changed. You can change. Anyone can change. Life can happen. But the least you can do is go and pursue your goals as opposed to getting, you know, pigeonholed by what somebody else says or does. Getting pigeonholed is no fun. Getting pigeonholed is horrible. Getting pigeonholed means you're living by somebody else, by what somebody else says you are, and what somebody else says you can and cannot do. Discover those limits yourself, and don't let, you know, a low or a high IQ have too much of an impact on you. Sure, it can give a general idea of where you might fit into the educational paradigm and how fast you might be expected to learn something.
Mm-hmm.
But ultimately, what difference does it make if you want to be a surgeon? And you could be a surgeon, say, when you're 24, or you can be a surgeon when you're 34. Well, either way, you're a surgeon when you're 40. You know, don't have this unhealthy attitude of, oh, I need to be able to do everything, and I need to be able to do it yesterday. Yeah, you can have the motivation. I need to be working toward it, and I should have been working on it yesterday when I was, you know, I don't know.
Asking that question on Quora.
Yeah, asking that question on, yeah. So, you know, living in the present is important, and worrying too much is not healthy. So you have that undeviating steadiness of purpose. You just do it. Well, you have some school books that you need to learn? Well, then learn them. You have something you know you need to do? Well, then do it. I'll give you an example. Right? There was, Caleb was hosting a 5.5-hour stream yesterday, and we got into talking a bit about learning. And we talked about, well, knowing how to learn is a meta skill, right? You learn how to learn, and you're essentially trained into that. I mean, you don't necessarily learn how to learn, although you technically learn it. But either way, if you know how to learn, you can learn pretty much anything, because there's a way of going about doing it. And ultimately, this steadiness of purpose is part of it. Because if you're steady in your purpose, you'll be like, okay, I need to continue making progress in this general direction. Well, what do? I have a plan that I'm going by. And I said, okay, I'll pick something that I can't do, and I'm going to learn it. I'm going to spend 2 hours a day learning it until I can do it. And Caleb's chat went and said, okay, learn to draw a portrait. Also aquaponics. So I'm going to learn how to draw a portrait first, and I'm going to be researching aquaponics and buying a whole bunch of stuff for that in the meantime. But what does doing a portrait entail? I don't know. But I do have 5 steps. I have 5 steps that I decided to settle on. I'm reading the book, drawing on the right side of the brain from start to finish, figuring out what supplies I need and obtaining them. I'm doing everything the book says from cover to cover. I'm keeping my eyes and ears open to research potential next steps. And then I'm going to settle on one next step and do it. So, I went and ransacked my wife's stuff. She has a set of graphite pencils, all sorts of cool stuff. So I ransacked my wife's stuff. That was step number 2. After I did some reading, I didn't read the whole book from start to finish because I realized that it would be better for me to try to work along with some of the stuff. But it took me a while to even find the book. Like I started researching many books until I figured out. I wound up reading for an hour and a half. Then spent 10 minutes ransacking for supplies, obtaining them, doing everything the book says. The first thing the book said was, before you do anything, just give yourself a point of reference as to where you're at. And there are 3 different things, one of which I had time for doing today, before I hit my 3-hour limit, which is pretty much a hard limit. And you'll be able to see. I'll go into full screen mode here, so you can see exactly how bad I am. And I decided it was do a portrait from memory. Like, you don't even get to look at anyone or anything.
Oh god.
A face portrait, like an actual portrait of a person from memory.
Okay.
So I thought, well, okay, I kind of remember Caleb. I mean, I know what Caleb looks like, but I don't have that kind of a construct. And you realize when you try to do it from memory, you're missing out on a whole lot. You get something like the essence of Caleb, but then all the details are just, and you realize, or at least I realized, how limited my attention is. Like, I'm always thinking about philosophy when I'm thinking about Caleb, or I'm thinking about finances, or I'm thinking about whatever we're talking about. But anyhow, I followed the instructions to the T.
Caleb.
Yeah. So, this is what happens. Okay, but I followed the instructions. That was my first thing. And then I thought, well, okay, I'll go ahead because I don't have that much time. I'm going to go and look at Caleb and see what did I do right, what did I do wrong. Obviously, I know it sucked, but you need to qualify and quantify exactly how did I suck, and what can I do to improve the situation. Anyhow, going and improving the situation led to this idea that, okay, the thing I remembered the most was the line that his beard took. Like, that was a distinctive Caleb feature. And the book says, okay, pick up on your ability to pick something up, and then focus on whatever that feels like, whatever that looks like, in terms of when you're looking at your next thing, or when you're trying to figure out and analyze the next thing you're going to draw. So trying to draw actually revealed a weakness, mainly that I'm intuitive. I abstract so much that my feet aren't on the ground enough for me to be able to actually draw a portrait of Caleb. I mean, obviously my technique sucks too. I don't know anything about drawing. But I didn't even come close when it came to a lot of things. Like, his face was too long. Like, I tried to do a long face because, he's kind of long and tall and skinny, but I overdid it. I didn't have too many details because I couldn't remember too many details.
Right.
But but the whole thing is I have a list of things to do, and I'm going to go on to the next exercise, and the next, and the next, and the next, and the next, and I'm going to get better. But I'm not going to get better just by theorizing about drawing. I'm going to get better at drawing by drawing.
Yep.
You're going to get better at math by doing math. You're going to get better at reading comprehension by reading and summarizing and giving a synopsis. You're going to get better at medicine by practicing medicine. You're going to get better at things in medical school by going and looking at cases, real cases, and then relating them back to what it is that you're learning in your courses. All these different things, you have a purpose in mind, and you line up your actions with the purpose, and you go forward in life, and it doesn't matter what anybody else says or does, because you have the freedom of will, you have the steadiness of purpose. And that goes just as well for little kids going into school. If you are stuck going to school, and you know any little kids that are stuck going to school, then at least do what you can in order to help them find that undeviating steadiness of purpose.
Mm-hmm.
Help them define and live life on their own terms.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
It's incredibly important. I mean, you can even get through the cancer of school if you do that. Now, granted, I'm saying that's suboptimal at very best.
Yeah.
Horrible at worst. I mean, what would be more, steadiness of purpose than, getting an internship and doing whatever it is you want to do and then just doing it. That's steadiness of purpose. And I could devote more time to drawing and so on, but if that were my only purpose, but it's not. So you have many purposes in life. You have, at least for me, I have my family responsibilities, I have work, I have streaming, I have drawing, I have church things, I have all sorts of administrative things that I need to take care of, and so that means that I need to have some semblance of order in my life, otherwise I'm never going to get to doing everything.
Mm-hmm.
So this whole thing is predicated upon an idea that order is good. Now, granted, some amount of disorder is certainly necessary too, but you can't have this steadiness of purpose in the midst of perfect chaos. That doesn't work either. But now I will be quiet and open up the floor to you.
All right. Well, that is what I, in my adolescence, and to a large part, I'm still definitely working on. And what my dad he commented on, is that when I was younger, etc., I never had much, what he called internal versus external motivation. I just did things either because I was told to do them or because it's valued to be good at these things, and I had a lot of different talents that I sort of just did because there was no rhyme or reason, etc. And just sort of in school, especially, just sort of I don't really know what I'm interested in. I have no passions, etc. But I can do all these subjects. They're all right. And my dad said that will be like a problem for you at some point or another. I mean, it already is, but it will come to hit you in the face, right? And it sort of did in college. I was like, well, I don't know what I want to be doing, and I know I don't even like being, I don't really like being here either. But if I have a goal, then it will make it tolerable, but I don't, necessarily have much of a goal, and so I struggled to be motivated for classes and stuff because I'm like, why am I doing this stuff? It's first of all, I know that it's this stuff that I'm doing is piss easy, and it doesn't feel very substantial at all. Like what? Like why am I here? Why am I wasting all this time, etc. And I'm still fixing that goal right now. I just set a goal. I was like, well, I want to be able to, once I'm out of college, I want to be able to finance myself and then have time to explore hobbies and other interests. And I want a job that I'm not only have aptitude for, but is like not like I haven't found the job that I'm extremely passionate about, right? I've just thought, well, if I go into finance, there's a lot of jobs available for me, and I like working with numbers. I find working with numbers by itself fun. So, and I have an aptitude for that sort of thing. So it doesn't hurt to go into that stuff and then explore my interests in other stuff out on the outside. Now, medicine, for example, that was my initial goal. That's a bad goal if you're not resolute. Like if you really want to be a doctor and you need to, there's so many arbitrary hoops you need to jump through. There's so much work you have to put into it. It's not something you can half-heartedly, just meander through. I mean, I guess you could technically, but it's just not. It's suboptimal to put in that much work to something that you don't even know that you're into. And I quickly figured that out. At least I was like, well, the holy crap, that's a lot of work, and I'm not ready to do that. And that same thing happened to my dad in school. He also wanted to be a doctor because his older brother's a cardiologist, and he's like, oh, well, I'll do that. And he's like, he quickly figured out he doesn't have the study habits, doesn't have like the rhyme or reason to do it, and dropped it. I'm lucky enough I don't have parents that sort of push things onto me and say, hey, you need to do this. Because there's so many kids just doing medicine and doing engineering and stuff just because, oh, yeah, my parents said do this. And they said, we won't pay for college unless you do one of these things, which is that's terrible. But I mean, well, I guess it's not terrible.
No,
it's not terrible in the sense that, like, well, yeah, you could go to college and just say, hey, well, then don't pay for my college. I'll do it myself. But it is that influence from a parent, I'd say, is negative because, well, you're saying, and the kid, and I can't expect a kid to sort of say, hey, like, have the moral fiber and have the not the moral fiber, just have the steadiness of purpose to say, hey, well, I'm doing this because I want to, etc.
Sure, you can.
You can expect that, but I think it's very likely that that won't be the case.
It's very likely, but you can raise your kids to have that. You can set out to do that, but that's not something that most parents do.
The problem is the parents that are pushing their kid to do a certain thing aren't raising their kids to do that. I think the kid's like, hey, you have to do this. That's like a big crux in the issue is that, well, while these kids have the capacity to do that sort of thing, they've sort of not been raised and they haven't been set up in the environment where they can realize that sort of thing. So they just sort of, a lot of these kids are very conscientious and very obedient, and they simply acquiesce to their parents' whims, however misguided and just arbitrary those may be. And then suffer the dissonance that arises with doing that, suffer with the social implications of if they don't succeed to that. Like it's just it's a mess, right? I'm lucky enough to have parents that were like, well, just get through college, because you should probably jump through the hoops, because it's going to be really hard for you to do it without that. I was like, well, if I did have a resolute goal that didn't involve college, my parents would endorse that too.
Of course.
If I had.
Of course. And if you didn't have a goal, then their goal would be get a goal.
Yeah. Exactly.
Or the default one, make enough money to be able to figure out what it is that you're going to do, and then, worry about how noble something. I mean, obviously don't break the law or do anything immoral, but, if it's not something you want to be doing for the rest of your life, at least, flip burgers so that you're not being a drain on everyone.
Exactly.
Flip burgers, sell cars, do whatever. Just do something and provide something, produce something.
Yes. Right. So my short-term goals at the moment are just getting ready for graduate admissions tests so I can tutor for them.
Okay. And that's what you're doing. You're acting in accordance with them, aren't you?
yeah, I've been practicing, and I found there not all the while the LSAT was not too bad, the GMAT was quite a bit more difficult than I thought. I took a full practice test, and there was quite a few concepts on it that I was like, "Oh heck, I don't know how to answer that." There were some much more involved questions than I was expecting, and I was like, "Wow, like actually, holy shit, I don't know this math." There's a lot of maths. There's quite a few math things that I was like, "Well, I was not aware of that." My intuition would not have guided me to that answer, and I was being sort of arrogant and approaching the test like, "Oh yeah, I'm just gonna get a really super duper high score without much, and then I'm just gonna go take it." Well, actually, I do need to be I need to there's gonna be some stuff I need to be learning, and I have to learn the skill too, and my aptitude is not gonna predetermine me to just the easy route out. So yeah, that was sort of a wake up call. The GRE was less so because it's the math on it was not terribly involved, and I just have to learn some vocab basically. But the GMAT is like, I was like wow, like they give you 2 minutes for these questions. Like this is not as trivial as I had thought it would be, but I need so I need to be studying and etc. And I also, my other short-term goal is to complete the first 2 actuarial exams, so I can essentially have that sort of job lined up just in case, whatever, and so I can get internships and etc. And so I'm gonna need to be studying for those sorts of things, and yeah, having sorts of like goals at least makes you do something, right? Like having, even, you don't have to be incredibly like is math, do you think math passion is, oh, like all I've ever wanted to do is draw portraits, like portraits has been my life's purpose, like so it's like, no, like if you just set a goal to do and then just go about, okay, well, I'm going to go do this, and I set this goal out to do, so I'm going to go work on it. You'll find you're getting a lot of stuff done, and in the process of doing that, you find, hey, do I want to continue doing this sort of thing, or hey, maybe I should rule this out. Like this was not very fun for me. I don't feel like I gained much value from this goal. Let me try something else instead. And in the process of doing things, you sort of feel out you feel out your quote unquote purpose, or your, what you think you should be doing with your future. And if you sit around and theorize, you won't come around to that same. Maybe you think like, oh well, theoretically I like this and this and this, so I'll like doing this. Then you find something about that job that you're like, holy shit, I can't stand that. I won't be able to do it. And then your goal gets derailed. Like theorizing is not enough. You need to go out and be doing tasks and completing them. And that can help you. That along, like both of them need to happen in conjunction. Obviously, you can't just blindly like, all right, now I'm gonna learn just some random language, like, and for no reason. Like there should be at least a little, like it's a nice balance, I think, of, well, you need to have some justifications, or you should. It would be smart to have some justifications to why, but it doesn't need to be some incredible, like, my life's passion, like resoluteness. It's like, well, this is, if anything, it's a cool thing to learn, and it would be a nice skill, and maybe I could make some money off of it. Let's do it.
And additionally, you might discover, and that's the other reason that having an open mind to certain things is good. You might discover some benefits that didn't initially occur to you. For example, actually starting this whole drawing idea and researching it led me to do some introspection. I probably due to some sort of an emotional block, I was thinking, well, this whole limits that I have in communicating my ideas with other people are not necessarily insurmountable, but that I have a really, really bad attitude toward it.
Mm-hmm.
So, and a decade ago, or actually about 13 years ago, I didn't have such a bad attitude. Like, I would talk with people, and we would have productive people with different opinions, and we would have productive conversations. And all these productive conversations with people that have different opinions, kept on happening. But then as my social circles grew, I wound up being able to have fewer and fewer meaningful conversations where you talk about a concept for a very long time, and you go into it at a very deep level. And I found that there being more and more and more disconnects between me and my peers, between my peers and me. And I was just thinking, well, that's because they don't want to hear what I have to say. They just plain old don't want to hear what I have to say, because I knew exactly what they said the moment they would say it, and I would listen to them. I'd listen to them say what it was, and I'd be able to repeat, either verbatim or as a synopsis. I would know what they said cold. I would understand their perspective, but I would disagree. And I thought, well, obviously they just don't want to hear anything. They just totally don't want to hear anything that's contrary to their view, which is, true. But then also the fact that people process things so very much visually. Like, I literally say, I can see their point of view, but they can't see mine. Well, maybe art would help with that.
Right.
If I have a business idea, or I was just thinking, okay, if I wanted to make it something very tangible, okay, if I wanted to buy a gumball machine and set it up next to, I don't know, next to the metal detectors on the way out of the store, or something. And I were to, just go to the management of the store and say, hey, can I set a gumball machine up next to the metal detectors on the way out? Versus if I were to go and sit there on a bench next to the metal detectors and draw the whole thing out and then draw a gumball machine in there and say, hey, this is my proposal. I'd like to have a gumball machine, and they see that. They can see what it looks like. At first I thought interior designers are a complete and total load of horse crap. I didn't think that means anything, because you can just go into a store, look at a sofa or look at a table, and think, okay, it would look like this in my house, and you just know it.
Right.
But then I realized that, some people actually need to have the picture, otherwise they don't know what the table looks like in the house until it's there.
Right, exactly.
Or the sofa in the house until it's there. So you need to have somebody to be able to not only paint a picture with words, but draw an actual picture, paint an actual picture that might resonate better with other people. And if I start relying on my words less and on learning how to draw and drawing pictures more, maybe I might have a better time convincing people of my positions, both political and in terms of things I'd like people to invest in, and all other matter of things. It could very well help me market myself, but I didn't realize that until I was already halfway through, the introduction to 4 or 5 books.
Right. Exactly. So you do realize importance when you go out and do things, because as abstract and as comfortable with abstraction as we are, it's the concrete helps a whole lot, it helps a lot, and it helps realize abstraction that you wouldn't arrive at on your own very easily, if at all. And doing something concrete, the implications become more clear. When doing stuff, you're like, well, this connects to this, etc. And so, even people, and I'd say we are very comfortable with the abstract. And even us, when we go out and do things, oh shit, I never even thought of that. Oh, damn. And then you feel really dense, right? You're like, well, why didn't I think of that, etc. And it's like, well, that's because doing helps a lot, no matter who you are. And so setting goals and completing things, it is never a bad thing to do, really. And I say never there again. It's a strong word, but take it, don't take it super literally. It's generally good to go out and set different goals and do different things and see how you like them, and not really think about, will I be good at this, blah blah blah, all these silly considerations. No, just go try. and when you fall on your ass and it's not extremely easy at first, and you draw your portrait of Caleb and you're like, oh shit, that doesn't look like Caleb. Don't get disheartened. Just realize, okay, well, I have a lot to learn. I have like when I take my first GMAT and I'm, and I'm not happy. I couldn't complete everything under the time constraints. Like, oh well, I have a lot to learn there, huh? Like I need to learn. Like that's just, it's more reason to continue to do these things. Like if you already can do it, why would you set that out as a goal? Like, oh, it's like me going, oh, I want to learn add numbers together. It's like, well, I can do that already. I'm not going to go out and set that goal. But so yeah, if you do, my main point there, I sort of was going off, is, yeah, even if you hit some obstacles or you don't find it to be trivially easy at first, that doesn't mean, that's more reason even that you should continue to try to get better at it. So yeah, and I think that much is intuitive.
Well, on that note, let's decide that we're going to have, let's say, we've been going for an hour and 6 minutes. So let's have an 8-minute intermission.
Okay.
And then resume streaming at 14 after. And then we can talk about price signals. See you guys on the other side.
Yep, see you.
All right, well, we're back, I hope.
I hope so too. I can check.
So yeah, our next topic is going to revolve around why markets should be free. And ultimately how knowledge and the free transmission thereof is incredibly important. Because if you don't know, for instance, what someone's willing to pay for something, or what someone's willing to get in exchange for something, which is exactly the same thing, on the two opposite sides of the coin, you can't wind up making appropriate deals. So having the market being free is a precursor to real fairness. It's an interesting thing to look at in terms of principle. Would you care to add anything about it before we go on to looking at about price signaling?
Only that, I would say. It's kind of like an analogy I would compare a free market versus an unfree market would be someone who has no. It's kind of like if a market wasn't free, it'd be an apt comparison. There's some feedback from your microphone. Okay, it stopped. Okay, I would say that it's kind of like asking. It's like it's those commercials you see on TV, and it's like, oh, here's a new car. What are your thoughts? And they're like, oh, it's great. I love it. I love that car. And and they'll be like, oh, it looks so sleek, and it's some like Chevy like mid-size like $20,000 car, like nothing special about it. And they're talking, and it's these not paid actors, just get like, oh wow, it's so cool and sporty, and
so sleek.
yeah,
Sporty and has leather seats.
luxurious, and they're like, and these commercials that are like supposed like, is that accurate signaling? Would you say, oh yeah, that's probably what the reviews of the car are too, like, and yeah, and you can see how like anyone can recognize how well, that's stupid. But if you don't let the market be free, then stuff like that can happen, with things being overvalued for what they are than they would be valued, and etc. And that would be, I'd say, a very blatant example and a blatant analogy, illuminating the implications. But yeah, that's all I would say at first. That was sort of any improv, but yeah.
That's exactly what that was. There's no sort of about it. That was any. What is this sort of you speak of?
Well, yeah, I didn't have anything to say, but I had to think of something right there. But yeah, I think that's. I wanted to say something. I felt like there was something to be said.
This can take a little while to get through, but I think it's something worth going through at bare minimum. Prices are precious. Free market prices that emerge from the voluntary interaction of buyers and sellers are necessary to human well-being. Few lessons in economics are more important than this. The economy is a fantastically complex, worldwide system of human cooperation. We all pursue our own purposes. No one is in charge of the whole system, and yet we cooperate. We all cooperate daily with countless people we don't know, but whose particular knowledge of ever-changing circumstances we must somehow take into account in order to coordinate our actions with theirs. Prices make this knowledge available, and this cooperation possible. And do you have the article pulled up, or do you have the book pulled up?
I do not have a bullet, but I can. Wait, do I? No, I don't. Let me see. Libertarian. No. Your mic is giving a lot of feedback.
Right. Or just in general.
I can't hear you right now. Like the mic is just being loud.
How about now?
Okay, it stopped.
Okay.
It was like a storm or something. Anyway, what is libertarianism.org?
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Okay, let me just go to books. Pull it up.
Yeah, you can find it under books, Econ and Free Markets.
Yep. All right. What page of the PDF?
Page 92 of the page 92 of the PDF. Page 86 of the book. We need free markets because we need the information that free market prices give us about what others know.
Yes.
We have no other way to communicate this information to all who might use it. This is the first of 3 principles of spontaneous economic order that account for why human beings need free markets. Market prices coordinate the actions of billions pursuing their myriad goals by communicating the changing, particular knowledge of everyone about the availability and potential uses of everything. This chapter explores that principle. It looks at how free market prices coordinate all our different plans, and how government interference with prices causes trouble.
Mm-hmm.
I pencil.
Oh, yeah.
3 lessons and a question from I pencil. Would you mind reading that in a non-sugar high way?
Yes, I will attempt. To appreciate the all-important role of prices in the economy, indeed, in society generally, a good place to start is Leonard Read's classic 1958 article, I Pencil. I recommend that readers who have not yet read this delightful piece download it from the internet and read it along with this lesson. The narrator in the essay, a lead pencil, or a lead pencil, the ordinary wooden pencil familiar to all boys and girls and adults who can read and write, asserts at the outset that, despite his seeming simplicity, not a single person on the face of this earth knows how to make me. To back up that astonishing statement, the pencil describes his family tree, the various and far-flung processes required to produce the many inputs that become a pencil: cedar wood, tint, graphite lead, lacquer, the brass ferrule, the eraser. The number of different skills that go into making the many elements quality modern pencil is really astonishing. Here are just a few of them. Logging to produce the cedar wood, mining graphite for the lead, mining zinc and copper from which to make the brass ferrule that joins the main pencil with the eraser, milling the cedar logs into pencil-length slats, making the machines that tint the slats and wax the slats, operating those machines, making the kilns for drying the slats once they are tinted and waxed, operating those kilns, making chemicals including ammonium hydroxide, sulfonated tallow, candela
wax.
Wax, paraffin wax, hydrogenated natural fats, cadmium sulfide, castor oil, resins, carbon black, factus, and vulcanizing agents. Man, I didn't know what some of these were. Refining and combining zinc and copper into brass. After describing all these processes, the pencil asks, does anyone wish to challenge my earlier assertion that no single person on the face of this earth knows how to make me? Probably not. Not if knowing how means knowing deeply enough to actually be able to do it. It's not credible that any one person could do the logging, the mining, the milling, the chemistry, and the metallurgy involved, not to mention making all the related equipment necessary. The pencil says, There isn't a single person in all these millions, including the president of the pencil company, who contributes more than a tiny, infinitesimal bit of know-how from the standpoint of know-how. The only difference between the miner of graphite in Ceylon and the logger in Oregon is the type of. Neither the miner nor the logger can be dispensed with any more than can the chemist at the factory or the worker in the oil field, paraffin being a byproduct of petroleum. Here's the first of 3 fundamental lessons about economic life that iPencil teaches. The human knowledge that is essential for producing the things we want and need is fantastically dispersed around the world. It is in the heads and hands of thousands or millions of people. There is so much knowledge in these processes that no one person or group could possibly know more than a tiny fraction of it. The second lesson is that all who participate are self-interested. They are not selfish in the pejorative sense, but self-interested. Neither the worker in the oil field, nor the chemist, nor the digger of graphite or clay, nor any who mans or makes the ships or trains or trucks, nor the one who runs the machine that does the knurling on my bit of metal, nor the president of the company performs his singular task because he wants me. Each one wants me less, perhaps, than does a child in the first grade. Indeed, there are some among this vast multitude who never saw a pencil, nor would they know how to use one. Their motivation is other than me. Perhaps it is something like this. Each of these millions sees that he can thus exchange his tiny know-how for the goods and services he needs or wants. I may or may not be among these items. The third lesson is a fact still more astounding. The absence of a mastermind or anyone dictating or forcibly directing these countless actions which bring me into being. No trace of such a person can be found. Instead, we find the invisible hand at work. No one is in charge. There is no mastermind, no boss. In a very real sense, the process is out of control. People work together to produce pencils and printers and sewing machines and smartphones, but nobody manages their production from start to finish. Nobody could manage these processes as a whole because they are too complex for any person or group even to begin to grasp, much less direct. Indeed, where people have tried to direct production processes, as in the old Soviet Union, they have failed utterly. Production must happen spontaneously, without a central direction, if it is to go forward smoothly. A market economy is a spontaneous order. Its orderliness and coherence happen without any design or plan, in response to the behavior of its constituent parts. Language is like this. It was not invented or designed, rather language evolves out of the interactions of people seeking to communicate. Snowflakes are spontaneous orders. They are beautiful, even perfect in their way, but not designed. They happen as a consequence of the interaction of water molecules under certain conditions of air pressure, temperature, and humidity. The internet is a spontaneous, undesigned order that is constantly evolving in response to human desires and innovation. Together, these 3 lessons about the economy raise key questions for this section. If A. The knowledge necessary for production is spread all over the globe, and B. Everybody whose knowledge and skills we need is self-interested, and C. Nobody is in charge, then how can it all work together so smoothly and independently? It would seem to be a recipe for chaos. What provides the coordination that keeps a decentralized market economy running so smoothly and productively? We take the coordination for granted. Is there any one of us who doubts that if we wanted a pencil today, we could go to the university store or the local drugstore and find one? Of course not. We would be surprised if there was not a supply of pencils there. But how does it come to be that pencils are for sale in the right quantities in the lots of stores all around the commercialized part of the world, with no one in charge of them getting there? Consider the wood of the cedar trees that goes into the pencils. Why do the lumber companies cut about the right amount of cedar rather than too much oak or maple instead? Once the cedar is harvested, it has many different uses. My wife has equipped our closets with cedar hangers, our backyard fence is cedar, some picnic tables are cedar. Why doesn't too much cedar go to fencing and picnic tables and too little go to hangers and pencils? There is perhaps no more important insight to all of economics than the answer to this question. What provides the coordination among the millions of people who contribute directly or indirectly to the making of pencils and every other good or service? Prices do. When pencil companies need more cedar for pencils and so bid up the price of cedar relative to that of oak, lumber companies harvest more cedar and less oak. The higher price of cedar makes cedar fences and picnic tables more expensive, so fence and table buyers purchase fewer cedar fences and tables and more of other varieties instead. Market prices thus function as a vast telecommunication system, signaling to everyone the relative availability and urgency of need for different goods, and thereby telling us how to keep our production and the use of goods adjusted to the wants and actions of others. This is the principle I mentioned earlier. Market prices coordinate the actions of billions pursuing their myriad of goals by communicating the changing, particular knowledge of everyone about the availability and potential uses of everything. Market prices are therefore strictly necessary.
Down.
Oh, am I going too fast? Okay,
You
sorry.
started speeding up again.
Market prices are therefore strictly necessary to allow societies to function smoothly and productively. Without market prices, not just any prices set arbitrarily, but prices determined in the free exchange, human society would regress to savagery because we would not know how to use our scarce resources sensibly. Prices provide us with the essential information about the current and anticipated state of things in society, as understood by everyone involved. They give us a reliable estimate of the value of one more of any good and the cost of making it available. They communicate concisely to everyone interested the specialized knowledge that is spread all over society. Prices need never be exactly right to do their job well. In fact, most prices are to some degree wrong. Most of the time because they reflect people's mistakes, misjudgments, and misinformation, as well as their good judgments and sound information. Nevertheless, market prices do a marvelous job for us, and nothing else can take their place. A good way to understand how prices communicate dispersed knowledge is to consider what a fix we would be in if we had no prices. Let's consider such a situation with a thought experiment. A railroad thought experiment.
I'll take a turn now.
All right.
Imagine yourself the commissar of railroads in the old Soviet Union. It's the early days after the revolution of 1917. You and your comrades are trying to eliminate markets and money relations, to do away with the anarchy of markets and to plan directly for the good of the people. Suppose you're truly dedicated to your task as many of the Bolsheviks were. They worked long days for little pay, burning with desire to make communism work. You're not out to line your own pockets. You're genuinely striving to do what is best for the Soviet Union. Now suppose you want to build a railroad line connecting City A to City B. Between the two cities stands a mountain range that presents you with a choice. You may build the railroad either through the mountains or around them. Both choices have advantages and disadvantages. If you go through the mountains, you'll save greatly on the amount of steel you use because the route will be much shorter than going around. At the same time, however, going through the mountains will require a great deal of engineering to design the bridges, tunnels, and elaborate grading necessary to get the railroad through the mountains. By contrast, if you go around the mountains, you'll need to use very little engineering because the line can be laid out simply on level ground. But you'll have to lay much more steel rail because the route is longer. Which route would you choose? Would you go through the mountains, saving on steel but consuming more engineering? Or would you go around the mountains to save on engineering while consuming more steel? You are the commissar of the railroads. The choice is entirely yours. Remember, we assume that you care only about what is best for the nation as a whole. Which would you choose? To keep the thought experiment simple, let us ignore all considerations other than the consumption of engineering and steel. Of course, there are also the ties and gravel, explosives, and excavating equipment, labor of many sorts, fuel, machinery, and so on. Let us ignore them or assume that the same amounts would be needed on both routes. Stephen?
Well, you're cutting out. Did you say?
No, would you please continue?
Yeah. I couldn't hear what the last part you said because you were cutting in and out.
Oh, let us ignore them or assume that the same amounts would be needed on both routes.
So what? I'm looking for that part.
A very top of page 96.
Okay. Once the railroad is built, each route has different advantages. For example, the route through the mountains would be shorter and hence would provide a quicker trip between the cities. On the other hand, Going around the mountains would allow the road to serve more towns and farms and factories along the way. Again, let us ignore all these considerations or assume that they come out even so that we have a manageable problem to think about. Use more steel and less engineering, or the other way around. How would you decide? Consider the kind of information you would need to take into account. You know that there are pressing needs for steel all around the country. Steel is needed to make girders for new hospitals, pots and pans, vehicles of all descriptions, surgical instruments, and thousands of other valuable goods. If you use more steel on your railroad line, less steel will be available for all of their important uses. At the same time, engineering services are urgently needed all around the country. Engineers' time and expertise are needed to design and build irrigation systems, mines, harbor installations, and thousands of other systems that will improve the country's productivity. If you use a great deal of engineering in building a railroad, the country will wait precious months for those other systems and services. So there's your problem. If, when you build your railroad line, the alternative uses of steel, the girders, the pots and pans, vehicles, surgical instruments, and so on, are more important and pressing to the nation than the systems and services that need engineering, then you should put the engineers to work building the railroad through the mountains. That way, you would save on the relatively more scarce and precious steel and use more of the relatively abundant engineering. But if the other uses of engineering, the irrigation systems, mines, harbor installations, and the like, are more important and pressing than the other uses of steel, then you should run the line around the mountains to save the relatively scarce and important engineering services and use more of the relatively abundant steel. What would you decide? When I ask this question in lectures, most of the audience have no answer, and that is the right answer. Think how much you would need to know in order to make the judgment. In order to know the value of steel and other uses, you would need detailed information on the value of the uses of which it would be put. Consider a new hospital that might be built with new steel girders. What is its value? To answer that question, you would need to know what the various doctors, nurses, and hospital administrators know about the currently available hospitals, their state of repair, the benefits of the new location and increased space, and so on. To know the value of steel in making pots and pans, you would need to know what various householders and restaurateurs know about the condition of their existing pans, their expectations of need for more pans or pans of different sizes, their preference for steel pots and pans as opposed to copper, and so on. You would need similar kinds of knowledge to assess the value of steel for manufacturing different kinds of cars and trucks. Think how dispersed and interconnected the information is that you would need with respect to even one vehicle. To know the value of, say, a new truck, you would need to know what the trucker knows about the value of the larger or faster shipments he can make with the new truck. To know the value of the particular shipments, however, say, of produce to grocery stores in the region, you would need to know what the grocer knows about the value of fresh groceries on his shelves. To know that, you would need to know what the customers know about the value of those groceries in making their family's dinners. The same kinds of considerations hold on to the engineering side. What would you need to know in order to assess the value of engineering used to construct, say, an irrigation system? You would need to know what the farmers know about how much the yield of their fields would increase with irrigation. But to know the value of that increased yield, the farmers need somehow to know what their consumers know about the value of the additional food produced. In short, to make a sound assessment of whether steel or engineering is more important in other uses, accordingly whether to build your railroad line through or around the mountains, you would need an overwhelming amount of detailed knowledge held by thousands, nay, millions of people throughout your society about the values of all the different uses of steel and engineering could be put. How would you get that information? Would you send out surveys? As commissar, you hold absolute power. You may execute anyone who does not tell you promptly what you ask. But do people even know what they prefer until they are faced with an actual choice? Often they don't, so they might not even be able to answer the survey questions accurately. And how would you aggregate all this information if you could get it all? Isn't it clear that you simply could not get the information you need? Furthermore, even if you could get complete and timely information about what everyone knows that's relevant to the use of steel and engineering, you would still need to deduce from it where to build your railroad. How could you possibly know that what all the information means for your decision? How would you begin to make sense of it? If you could not say which route you would choose for the railroad from city A to B, You gave the right answer. It is impossible to decide on any rational basis. In the words of Ludwig von Mises, who first pointed out this problem to the socialists, you would be groping in the dark. You would have to guess. Even though you have absolute power as commissar of railroads, and even though you have the best will in the world and a burning desire to make communism outperform capitalism, you would be unable to determine the best route because you could not possibly know which route would be less costly to society overall. The knowledge you would need is too vast, too dispersed, too specialized, and too changeable. This is the knowing problem of central planning. It explains why comprehensive socialism must necessarily fail, even if those involved have the best intentions. Central planners cannot get the knowledge they need in order to plan effectively. Now let's change the thought experiment slightly. Instead of commissar of railroads in the old Soviet Union, you are now the chief operating officer of a for-profit railroad company somewhere in the capitalist West. You face the same problem. You want to run a railroad line from city C to city D, and a mountain range stands between them, so you must go either through or around. How would you decide on your route? Again, assume that all the other costs and benefits come out the same on both routes, so that the only variables to consider are the different amounts of steel and engineering you would use. What would you do? Unless you are quite unusual, you would do what's cheapest. You would calculate the total cost of each route, in each case multiplying the amount of steel required by the price of steel, and adding that to the amount of engineering required times the price of engineering. Whichever route gives the lower total cost is the one you choose. Typical greedy capitalist. All you care about is the company's profits, the bottom line. Like capitalists the world over, you would give no consideration to the overall good of the nation. You would ignore whether steel or engineering is more valuable in other uses, even though that is crucial to the overall productivity and living standards of your society. You would just do whatever is cheapest, focusing on your company's profits and ignoring the well-being of other people. But, and here's the marvel, in doing whatever is cheapest in the free economy, you unwittingly do take the consideration of every piece of information and every bit of human knowledge about the values of unnumbered alternative uses of steel and engineering. You learn from examining a few numbers all that the central planner would be powerless to find out in months of investigation. And choosing the cheaper route spares the resources that are more valuable in other uses. How? Because all the relevant knowledge available is embodied in the prices of steel and engineering. The lower total cost of one route compared with the other tells us that the combined total of steel and engineering needed for the cheaper route is less valuable in other uses than the combination needed for the more expensive route. Suppose many existing hospitals are small and out of date.
This is opportunity cost, by the way. This is nothing more than opportunity cost.
Yeah. Suppose many existing hospitals are small and out of date in a free market for hospital care. The stronger the desire for new space, the more healthcare companies and philanthropists will be willing to pay contractors for the construction of new hospitals, and therefore, the more the contractors will be willing to pay, if necessary, for the steel girders with which to build them. The price of steel likewise reflects the number of householders desiring to buy new steel pots and pans, and the urgency of their desires. It reflects the amount any trucker will pay for a new delivery truck, which reflects the value of the produce deliveries he makes, which reflects the value of the groceries on the shelves, which reflects the value of the final consumer's dinner. The number and urgency of all these direct and indirect desires for steel are reflected in the price offered for steel as the various would-be buyers compete for its limited quantity. The price of engineering at any time is determined in the same manner. If new irrigation systems would improve farm output only by a little, then farmers would not be willing to pay much for the engineer's time, and the price of engineering would be correspondingly lower. This railroad example shows that the market prices give us a reliable gauge of the value of goods and services. As we saw in Chapter 7, the market price reflects the value to the last buyer just barely willing to pay that price, and the cost to the last seller just barely willing to accept that price. Thus, the market price at that moment, remember prices constantly fluctuate, is the actual value in society of one more unit of that good at that time. What someone in society gives up in providing one more, and the benefit someone in society realizes from gaining one more. Only with this knowledge can we calculate the least costly way of producing the things we want and thereby satisfying as many different human wants as possible. That is one supremely important reason that free market prices, and hence the free markets they depend on, are so important to human flourishing. With market prices to guide us, we can make use of the knowledge of everyone in society about the supplies and uses for every different resource. Let's see. In George Selgin's useful term, prices serve as knowledge surrogates. They distill the knowledge of millions of people into a number. With market prices to guide us, each of us can stay well coordinated with all the millions of others, never using for a less important purpose what someone else needs for a more important purpose. Without market prices, however, we would be in trouble, unable to coordinate our innumerable activities. The next chapter illustrates that trouble with some supply and demand analysis and offers a memorable story. And yeah.
Free market.
Ah, yes. Beautiful.
So, it's interesting because I was just thinking about how much is this worth to me, right? This graphite set, a slightly used graphite set of my wife. Right? If my wife didn't have one of these, I don't know, what would I be willing to pay? Well, I mean, I have to think about, okay, how valuable is my demonstrating a point to Caleb's stream audience? How valuable is it to show people process of learning? Conversely, I mean, how valuable would the drawings that I produce be? How valuable is my time? What am I trying to accomplish, and what am I sacrificing in order to do that? Now, fortunately, I had these, so I didn't have to put any too much sacrifice, except for, that of being a bad husband and ransacking my wife's stuff without asking. I should have just been patient and asked her. But that particular value, or the value of going out to the store and getting one. Certainly I'm not going to go and mine a bunch of graphite and make the pencils in the set. But ultimately you wind up having what you have and purchasing what you purchase, and it reflects how much it is that you value whatever it is you're going to be doing with it. It's a very, very simple principle. Not at all evil, it's just an indicator. Mm-hmm. And still, somehow people wind up getting bent out of shape over it.
Oh, yeah. Yes, indeed.
Oh, yes, Hamza. Good that you knew where it was going. That's, yeah.
It's a great piece of text.
That is one of the best economics books for just getting the actual... getting the principle of the thing that I found. It's great. In fact, I would say probably, if we're going to do that thing where we reduce people into groups, I would say right libertarians as a group probably know more about economics than any other group of people that associate themselves around politics. Simply because it makes sense, and having this understanding of the economy, and having the idea that waste is bad, and having the idea that I'd like to have as much as I can for as little as and I'd like other people to be able to as well, or even if I don't, I don't really care about my neighbor, but they obviously want to get that too. Free market causes there to be win-win situations for everybody involved.
Yeah.
And so if that's your goal, or rather if that's everybody's goal, if that is the collective goal, is to get as much as you possibly can out of the situation, then the free market is definitely your best bet. In fact, there's a nice piece later on in the book that talks about deforestation, or rather whether or not you use a piece of land for a wildlife preserve or for an oil well. If you're interested in that, you can take a look at the at that particular book from libertarianism.org. And that, if you are a fan of government control over resources as opposed to private ownership, that would be a very interesting piece for you to read. I'd love to hear your response to it. We'll eventually get to it, of course. Yeah, you can send me messages on Quora. You can send Steven messages on Quora. And, there's Discord. There's all these other different ways getting a hold. I love discussing this stuff. This stuff is worth discussing.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, it's of utmost importance, in my opinion. It should be like necessary reading. Well, no reading should be necessary, but you should read it. I'll just say that. I'll leave it at that. It should be something that was read.
Yeah, and the reason that people have an incentive to put this kind of stuff out for free is because it's congruent with their beliefs to educate more people about the free market, so they don't wind up getting their rights impinged upon by more people that decide to go into government with all the best of intentions, or the worst of intentions, or whatever the intentions may be, and making suboptimal decisions that affect the lives of everybody.
Yeah.
That's why wealthy libertarians can subsidize other people doing it, to say these sorts of things, because ultimately it is better for them and for everyone else if people know about free markets, if people know about economics, and if people can act as rationally as possible with the amount of information that they have.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. And it's really intuitive as well, and that's what's nice. It's not some hole. It's not like a bunch of rabbit holes that it's not quantum physics, right? It's not something. So it is easy to spot in the wild when these things are being infringed upon. You can, or at least with a little bit of cogitation, you can figure out why. But and so a lot of these, goings on in the government, etc., that appear, that, oh man, I don't know, is this out of sight, blah, 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 etc. You can pretty quickly figure out, with just looking at the politician doing it, their lobbyists, etc., what's going on, especially if you assume that everyone isn't self-interested. But you have, while considering, okay, is the invisible hand at work here at the same time? Or are they, infringing on the invisible hand, essentially? And that's not too difficult to come across. So you can really spot quite easily, like, corruption and problems and why things are wrong. You can give a good reason as well. So that helps you solidify your stance as well. So that's really important.
And freedom is this actually brings up a point about happiness and freedom and things of that nature too, that Ibrahim was mentioning earlier today. Is that if you could choose happiness with control, happiness with no freedom, or happiness but having someone kind of in charge of you, or freedom, which one would you pick? And I just said, well, that's a false dichotomy.
Yeah.
Because what makes me think that somebody else knows better than me what's best for me? What makes you think that someone knows better than you what's best for you? And even if we do both think that happens to be the case, well, we can go and get the advice of said person. You don't need to go and immediately elect him to be king of the world or whatever.
Right, and also the sort of the idea that like it becomes a pointless thought experiment once you assume that you can't be happy and free, and once you know, once you assume that whoever's controlling you is giving you happiness as well. Like it becomes pointless because it detaches from the real world at that point. So whether you prefer one or the other in the thought experiment, it actually doesn't have really any implications in real life, in the real world. So
I mean,
you know,
you can have an AI that goes and and it constantly gives you a brain scan, monitors you, and determines the level of certain drugs to continually inject you with in order to establish a frame of mind. Does that make you happy? So yeah,
right.
that's a false dichotomy. You can you can go down the rabbit hole as deep as you want to go, and at every single level, it doesn't work.
Yep.
And then even if you decide, well, I don't want to be happy. Well, going back to the whole idea of self-ownership that we started this entire discussion on, does that mean that you have the right to make everybody else miserable too? To force everyone else to be in a situation in which they would be miserable just because you want to be miserable?
Right.
No. So yeah, allowing people liberty and allowing people a free market, which is, you know, if we talk about the difference between a free market and democracy, democracy is, you know, two wolves and a lamb voting on what's for dinner. A free market is everyone voting with their dollars, bidding on things, and the person to whom something is most valuable gets the thing.
Yeah. Oh yes.
We have about 2-3 minutes left of the stream. Do you have any parting thoughts that you'd like to leave our audience with?
You should read this for yourself as well. I guess that's important too. Oh, yeah. Furnish your own, you know, insights, etc.
Hamza says, what if your happiness is dependent freedom? I think we discussed that already. You can decide to become dependent without making anybody else dependent. Or you can gather around a whole bunch of friends of yours that want to be dependent in the same way, and then you know, create a community. But yeah, I just saw that and wanted to answer Hamza's question, but please do continue.
Yeah,
you're saying read it for yourself.
Definitely. Yeah, read it for yourself. Yeah, that's, you know, make your own connections as well.
Summarize it, explain it, argue about it.
Yeah. Come up with a counterpoint. See, you know, argue that, etc. See what you know, just strengthen your own understanding.
Bounce the ideas off of each other, and just don't be afraid of the conclusions. And then also look at what axiomatic system you're using in order to make the determinations as to what's good and what's bad. Because if you're using a different axiomatic system, you may very well come to different conclusions.
Mm-hmm.
I'm starting from the axiom that life, liberty, and property are good things, and everyone should be entitled to what belongs to them.
See you, Hamza. Thank you for tuning in.
All right. See ya. Thank you, Hamza. Your company is very valued.
Oh, yeah. Yes, indeed.
Well, on that note, we'll also say goodbye to everybody else who has been silently participating. Watching, receiving, cogitating, doing push-ups next to their desk, making dinner. I don't know, whatever it is that you're doing while watching the stream. Thank you all for tuning in as well.
Yep.
And thanks to all who wind up seeing this video after the fact. We'll
Too.
see you. Our next stream will be held on, on Monday. So tomorrow night, Eastern Time. Sorry, I keep on remembering because I have to get up Tuesday morning to do it. But tomorrow night, Eastern Time, 9 p.m. 9 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. Monday, the 25th, I think. Yeah, Monday the 25th. All right.
Yep.
Talk to you later.
See you.
Hi.